Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this virtual meeting of the Lifelong Learning Committee on the 25th of August 2021. Particularly would like to welcome, I see some of our non-elected members of this committee who've joined us today, so you're very welcome. It's nice to see you. Can I remind all members and officers to mute your microphones throughout the meeting unless you're speaking, so that we don't get the awful feedback. And I would advise everyone that today's meeting is being streamed live and is also recorded to be available on the Council's YouTube channel after the meeting. Can I ask if we have any apologies or substitutions for today's meeting?
Convener, there's an apology from Councillor Reid and Councillor Ian James is substituting for him.
Thank you, Linda. Can I ask, Linda, if you can take a roll call of everyone attending today's meeting?
Thank you. Morning, councillors. When I call out your name, could you please indicate if you're present? Councillor Baird?
Present.
Councillor Liz Barrett?
Present.
Mr. Jack Bell? I'll go through the list and come back to those that have not answered. Mr. Andy Charlton? Councillor Duff?
Present.
Mr. Ferguson?
Present.
Councillor Forbes?
Present.
Mr. Gowrie? Was that any reply from Mr. Gowrie? Right. Councillor James?
Present.
Councillor Massey?
Present.
Mrs. Macaulay?
Present.
Mr. McBride? Councillor McDade?
Present.
Ms. Moran?
Present.
Councillor Pover?
Present.
Councillor Purvis?
Present.
Councillor Rebeck?
Present.
Councillor Sarwar?
Present.
Councillor Shires?
Present.
Councillor Simpson?
Present.
Ms. Weston?
Present.
Right, we'll go back to some of the non-elected members. Mr. Jack Bell?
I know there's apologies from Jack, Linda.
Thank you. Mr. Andy Charlton? And Mr. Dean McBride? Right, I think all those that are attending are here that are able to come. Thank you, convener.
Thanks, Linda. Can I ask if there are any declarations of interest from elected members in respect of business on the agenda? No. Thank you. Which moves us on to the minutes of previous meetings. Can we agree the minute of the meeting of the Lifelong Learning Committee of 26th of May 2021?
Agreed.
Agreed.
And can we note the minute of the meeting of the Joint Negotiating Committee of the 16th of March 2021?
Noted.
Noted.
Can we also note the minute of the meeting of the Perth and Kinross Children, Young People and Families Partnership of the 8th of April 2021?
Noted.
Noted. Noted.
Thank you. That takes us on to the papers in front of you, and the first paper today is the Service Recovery Plan, paper 5. And can I invite our Executive Director, Sheena Devlin, to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, convener, and good morning, members of Lifelong Learning Committee. By way of introduction, I would just like to say that Education and Children's Services is required to report to the Scottish Government on the use of COVID-19 recovery funds provided by them. And therefore, we present this report to the elected members for information. The report provides an update on the funding received from the Scottish Government and Perth and Kinross Council in support of service recovery in 2020-21 and includes plans for 21-22. The report details the wide range of interventions across all service areas and the scale of planning and monitoring required to meet the objectives of the funding. Myself and colleagues from ECS are here today to answer any questions. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Gina. Can I ask if there are any questions on the report, and if members can put a queue in the chat function, that would be helpful. I'll give it a few minutes to let you put your queues in. Okay, so I have a question from Councillor Rebeck, followed by Councillor Simpson.
Thank you very much, Convener. And before I ask this question, it's really important to note that we're speaking about the recovery here, and that I think we all understand that COVID has had an impact on everybody, whether that's pupils, staff, anybody who's involved in education in any sense. It's been a really hard time, and it will continue to be challenging move forward, and it's important to note that before I ask my question. But it feels like the Scottish Government has supported the Council particularly well in terms of funds, but it's also important to note that as a Council we have used that resource as well as we can do. And my question, I guess, is the impression that those impressions that I get from this report, that we have been resourced well by Scottish Government, but that we've actually used that resource effectively. So I just want an opinion as to whether my feeling with this report is accurate or not. Thank you.
Convener, I'm happy to pick up on Councillor Rebeck's question. Councillor Rebeck, it would be fair to say that the work that all the teams across all parts of ECS have undertaken, from early years through primary, secondary inclusion, criminal justice services, services for children and young people, and of course our business and resources team, have worked incredibly hard to make sure that the many different pots of money that have come our way for different things as part of our recovery have been targeted to the areas that we know are the areas that require greatest support and attention. In other words, it's based on the evidence that we have gathered during the course of the pandemic, and what we are doing is responding to the emerging need from those areas. So absolutely, I would concur that the resource that we have is indeed going to make what we think will be the most and biggest differences in the areas it's most required. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
That's a very apt question to get us started with, Councillor Rebeck. Councillor Simpson, followed by Councillor Massey.
Thank you, Convener. My question relates to item 5 in Appendix 1, which refers to additional costs for safe reopening, etc. And I just wondered if we might get a little more information on how that is being spent, either now or in a future time. I'm particularly concerned, as a number of parents have spoken to me, about air quality in our premises, particularly the classrooms, and any way we have of monitoring that air quality.
Convener, I'm happy to commence and answer, and we have colleagues here from Property Services as well who would be able to provide more information. Councillor Simpson, it would be fair to say that we've worked very closely in ECS with our colleagues in Property Services from the first reopening following the first lockdown, and significant work was undertaken to assess the school estate and understand where there may be any areas that required some additional resource to enhance and maximise the ventilation in those areas. Of course, some of the best ventilation is fresh air, and opening windows has certainly been part of that, and we make no bones about that. We recognise that that can cause some people some disquiet and discomfort if their thermal comfort is not perhaps in tune with that fresh air that may be coming in through windows. But that is certainly part of it, as is mechanical ventilation in a number of our buildings, and is what I would describe as the judicious use of CO2 monitors. There is no point in having CO2 monitors absolutely everywhere across the estate if they are, first of all, not required in particular places because the quality of the ventilation by other means is absolutely sufficient. And secondly, if we haven't done the training to support people in understanding what those monitors actually are telling people. And so there has been time spent investing not just in the resources, but also in the appropriate allocation and support for understanding those. And we have engaged in discussions all the way through this with our colleagues in professional associations and trade unions. And in fact, the work of Perth and Kinross Council in this particular area has been highlighted by the Scottish Government as being best practice. So I hope that offers you and in turn some of your constituents reassurance about the approaches that we have been taking. And I don't know, Convener, if our colleagues from Property Services want to add anything else. I'm not sure that there may be.
Sheena, Property Services aren't here yet. They're coming along for a later paper, but I don't think they'd be able to add anything to what you've already said.
Thank you, Carol.
I think if anyone had any specific issues in relation to, a school within their local area or whatever, then we could easily direct that through Property Services. Does that assist you, Councillor Simpson?
Well, it does indeed, Convener. Thanks. If I just might seek some further reassurance that if there is any further expenditure required, that we are confident that we have sufficient resources to cover that.
Councillor Simpson, I guess that's getting a little bit into the realms of crystal ball gazing and knowing what future resource may be required and whether indeed there would be a sufficient resource for that. What I can say is we have received a share of additional funding relatively recently to support exactly that, an enhanced ventilation strategy across our estate.
Well, thanks very much.
Thank you for that. Councillor Massey, followed by Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Convener, and thanks to Mr Coburn for this report. It's clear to me from this report that the Education and Children's Services of Perth and Kinross Council have used and will continue to use the grants made available from the Scottish Government to assist in the ECS's response to the ongoing COVID pandemic with a thoughtful and caring attitude towards all our staff and young people, and I applaud them for their work. My question is on item 7, digital support. At point 7.1, it states that 1,500 young people have benefited from having digital support. Could you give us a little more information on what measures and assistance were put into place to help these 1,500 young people to access learning in Perth and Kinross during the lockdowns?
Convener, if I may commence, and I'm sure colleagues perhaps within the Education Services team may want to come in. Could I just say, Councillor Massey, first of all, thank you very much for your opening comments. I will be sure to relay those to those in the team who are not able to be here today. Thank you very much for that. In relation to the implementation of digital devices, work actually commenced on this going back to the Easter holiday period in lockdown 1, so in April 2020, when in fact before there was a move nationally to provide devices for children who may not have those to support their learning at home, our schools sought to undertake a survey to understand who was without and actually loaned out devices from the school for young people and families to be using at home. And that was a temporary measure. And then, of course, what we had was the very welcome national drive to ensure that there were devices available for those that did not have those. Of course, along the way, what was happening in Perth and Kinross was happening all over Scotland, and indeed was happening all over the world, it would be fair to say. And the demand for digital devices worldwide was unprecedented, and supply could not in fact keep up with demand. However, we were able to provide exactly what we've said there, and it wasn't just about providing the devices and then letting people get on with it. We recognised also that for some homes and families, connectivity would be an issue, and so we also provided data and bundles to support online access, because there was no point in having a device if you couldn't actually get on it. But the other thing, of course, was that not every young person would perhaps be able to maximise the use of a particular digital device without some kind of support. And so through services for children, young people and families and staff in schools, there was some additional support able to be provided to young people who are accessing their learning from a place other than school and doing that via a digital device. The types of devices that we used, we tried to ensure were dependent on being age and stage appropriate, and therefore it wasn't a case of just ordering one kind of device. We recognised that for different age groups, different kinds of devices were required. What we also did then was learn from lockdown 1 as to what went well and what didn't go so well, and we did that through a survey with parents, carers, children and young people and indeed staff, and then planned differently for lockdown 2. And certainly the feedback that we have had from children, young people, parents, carers and staff was that the remote learning experience using digital devices was far improved by the time we came to lockdown 2 than the experience that necessarily everybody had had the first time. We also recognise that whilst young people were not in schools, the only means of learning was not a digital one, and that actually hard resources were also provided for youngsters to be able to use. So I'm talking about books, pads, jotters, pens, paper, that kind of thing as well. And it was the combination of all of that that we tried to provide. I'll ask if David McCluskey, who has been leading on this within Education Services, would like to add further, if that's okay, convener. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sheena. Yeah, and I suppose what I can add to that is the where we are right now today. So Sheena alluded to the fact that one of the issues that we'll probably face is the global supply chain of IT and devices, and indeed that's had an impact on us. So, for example, we ordered 350 laptops in November 2020. These were delivered to us on the 16th of July of this year. So we're currently engaging with our secondary schools to check that the need that they'd actually identified in November 2020 still exists, or if they want to tailor that or change that at the moment so that we can get those devices built and issued and to be in the hands of young people. That information and gathering that we'll do with all of our schools will then assist us in the next load of IT that we then put an order out for, because obviously we want to be really mindful of that kind of global supply chain. What I can say is that from PKC and previous Scottish Government monies, we ensured eventually that every child or young person who didn't have access to a device got that access. All of our secondary senior phase pupils had direct access to their own device, a laptop that would ensure that they had what they needed for the qualifications that they were sitting. And what we're really doing now is we're looking to ensure that every young person, not only in this from primary and S1 to S3, not only has access to a device, but has a device of their own.
Thank you to both of you for answering my question such comprehensively.
Councillor Massey, if it's of interest to you, we're also able to provide some information about how digital devices have been able to be used in other parts of ECS and not just schools. And we also have some further information about wider support, if that's of interest to you just now.
Yes, that would be great.
I'll ask Jackie Pepper to start, and then Sharon Johnson would have some information as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheena, and the opportunity to talk about the support that was given to prisoners. And you'll know that as a committee that we were supporting the early release of prisoners during various periods of lockdown over the last year, and we recognise that access to a device and access particularly to a mobile phone with connectivity was really important for people leaving the justice system and reintegrating into the community in order that they could access essential services, particularly those services that were to assist them with their ongoing health, well-being and management of some of the challenges they may be experiencing, particularly around alcohol or substance misuse. So part of the arrangements to support people in the communities was to make sure that they had access to a device and access to a whole range of support already uploaded onto that. So that was another area where we recognised the importance of digital communication and telephone communication in the current arrangements that we have. So I think it's important to recognise that this was something that we took on board across the whole service and supported those people in most need. Thanks.
Good morning, everybody. I would just like to add some of the wider supports that the service was able to provide to children and young people in terms of education. And as the Executive Director has stated, the wider aspects of supporting digital learning. So we supported obviously children and young people to access good learning experiences. We supported staff to increase their skills, and also parents, because parents did need some support around digital learning as well. And as the Executive Director said, during lockdown 1, we were very mindful of the fact that we did not want young people to be sitting in front of devices all day. And so there were a range of services within education which provided activities that were about play and active learning, and some of our partners supported that. So for instance, Live Active Leisure provided online lessons that were about being active and outdoors and engaging in sport and physical activity. As the lockdown 2 came into force, we did some learning, as the Executive Director had said, through surveys, and we provided a lot of additional support to children with additional support needs. So we opened up more provisions for in-person learning, and we had a really comprehensive range of health and well-being activities and supports for young people who were facing real anxieties about not being in school and accessing some of the supports that they would normally have. Parents also received a lot of support from our educational psychology service, and we had telephone hotlines and check-ins with children and young people and with parents, and also to make sure that staff wellbeing was well looked after. So we did have a comprehensive range of activities. The childcare strategy team and the parenting and family learning teams also provided a range of supports in relation to family support, online parenting programmes, and some activities around play. So we felt that the engagement during lockdown 2 was much improved, and we did provide a very good offer, I think, for children who were vulnerable and for children who had additional support needs, and also their parents. And we've had very positive feedback in relation to that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. It was very comprehensive. Thank you for your question, Councillor Massey. Moving on to Councillor Forbes and then Councillor Baird, please.
Thanks, Convener. Councillor Massey actually asked almost an identical question to what I was going to ask, but the answers have flagged up a couple of supplementaries, if that's okay with you, Convener. And it was about the digital kit. Did I hear correctly that the stuff was ordered in November 2020 and wasn't delivered until July the following year, or did I mishear that?
No, that's correct, Councillor. What I did say was that there was an order put in November 2020 that we didn't receive until July 2021. That wasn't the entirety of the digital offer that went out. It was one of the orders that we placed.
And just about the sort of purchasing arrangements for that, is that something that, as a council, we would just go out to the market and buy, or was it through some sort of central Scottish arrangement?
We would adopt our normal purchasing arrangements around about that, but I would actually pass that on to one of my colleagues from the finance team to see if they're able to give us a bit more detail on that question.
Yes, there is a Scottish Excel agreement of where we do purchase our digital equipment with support from our IT colleagues. So we don't just go out to the market. It is a contract that's there, but it's obviously an issue that's been, as Sheena has already alluded to, worldwide shortage of laptops and iPads at that time. So we did get quite a lot in at the beginning, but the later orders have been a lot longer in coming in, and there's still a backlog, and putting orders in now would still take quite some time. And we were doing monthly returns to Scottish Government, and we did mention on the returns to Scottish Government that there was issues about the supply chain for councils as well. So we did highlight it back to Scottish Government in our returns.
Okay, thanks. And my second point, Convener, if I may, was regarding the digital devices. I think we bought, I can't remember the number, but quite a substantial number of dongles, for want of a better phrase. What will happen to those in the future? Do they just stay with the children, and do we just keep funding them, or do they eventually work their way back into the system as we get back to some sort of normality?
I can start off on this, and David McCluskey will be able to pick up on this as well. This is a very live issue. In fact, we were just discussing this yesterday with our head teacher colleagues. The devices that are loaned to children, young people and families, if they're on a loan, then they're expected to be returned at some point. In terms of data is obviously used, so the data packages would be used up, so that there would be nothing there to return. But we are looking at how we can ensure that we are able to monitor as the new devices come in, where they go, and the expectation about those being returned, or indeed there are particular batches of devices that have been made available that are for particular individuals, and that's not just an ECS, that's different community groups where those are devices that would stay with those individuals. And of course we now know that there is a drive across Scotland to ensure that all children and young people have their own device, and that would be, you know, their own device for the duration of them learning. What we also know, Councillor Forbes, of course, is that particular devices will have a set shelf life, after which they you know, are superseded by newer, faster and different tablets or Chromebooks or whatever that happens to be, and therefore they're not supported any further. And there's a continuous conveyor belt of new devices coming in. So where they're on a loan, we expect those to be returned. Where they're able to be allocated to individuals, for those individuals, then they will be.
Okay, thanks, Gina. I'd assumed that these were on some kind of monthly contract, that we were paying a data package every month, but I understand from your answer that actually it was a kind of a bulk purchase of data, and it will expire, and that'll be the end of the data then, is that right?
And we'll continue to, you know, there'll be a different approach depending on the different needs. So for some young people for whom they will continue to learn at home, then there's an ongoing need to provide data if that's what's deemed to be required. Sure. For those that are back, you know, doing the bulk of their learning in school, then those packages may no longer be required. So again, I know that it's often frustrating that there's just not a single answer that says it's X or it's Y, because it's often a combination of X, Y and Z.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Gina. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you. Councillor Baird, followed by Councillor Purvis.
Thank you, Convener. My question is slightly different. It's on Appendix 1. It's regarding to the additional funding that was provided for extra teachers and support staff. I just wondered how difficult it was to recruit the number of staff required, and have you still got a few unfilled posts yet? Thank you.
Thank you. Sheena?
Convener, I think Sharon will be able to have the detail of that information about recruitment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Baird, yes, we were anxious about the recruitment process, because of course every local authority in Scotland is currently recruiting for teachers and support staff. I would have to say that we had undertaken a really rigorous recruitment process as part of our normal staffing exercise in January of this year. And from that exercise, we had quite a large list of appointable teachers. And so we were in a very good position when we needed to recruit the additional teaching staff to be able to do that. And we've been successful actually in recruiting teachers. Support staff has been slightly more challenging, and so at this point we're not fully staffed and fully recruited to the PSAs, the Pupil Support Assistant cohort that we had hoped. And we still have one or two teachers that we are seeking to finalise checks with. But overall our staffing. We worked very hard over the summer break to make sure that we had teachers in place, and in fact they've all gone through an induction process at the start of the session and are now in schools. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Purvis, please.
Thank you, Convener. I had a few questions, if that's all right. I'll ask them individually, if you don't mind. The first one actually follows on from Councillor Baird's question in relation to the additional funding, and particularly the two new models that are being instituted in primary and secondary. I'm just wondering, the funding seems to be, although we've had it for last year and some of it's been carried over to this year, that it says that it was given to the schools on a one-year basis. So I suppose my question in this regard is, has that had an impact on the recruitment, if as I assume we're recruiting people for a fixed term contract? And then also, what's the intention going forward? Do we have any indication from the Scottish Government whether there will be any future funding to support this? And if not, is it something that the Council would look to support going forward, or is it just deemed to be a brief intervention to focus on the recovery from the pandemic?
Convener, if I can start and Sharon can come in with any other points, if that's okay. In terms of the initial tranche of funding that was made available nationally, that was indeed non-recurring funding. But just I think within the last 10 to 14 days, we've had confirmation of the funding that was given for that purpose on a non-recurring basis will now indeed be made recurring funding. So whilst yes, we've recruited on the basis of fixed term contracts, which is what we have to do if the funding is non-recurring and not within our base budget, we're now in a situation where we can look differently at that, because there will be the money going into the future. Sharon, I don't know if you want to add any more to that.
Thank you, Sheena. Just to add, Councillor Purvis, that while we were aware that this funding was actually given in relation to COVID recovery, and much of last year's allocation was in fact used to support cover where teachers and support staff had been isolated because of either a positive case of COVID or a close contact. So we were aware that, and that is still part of the funding expectation of this money, but what we were able to do was to target that support where it wasn't needed for additional health mitigations or health and hygiene mitigations or supply cover. This year, I think we've taken a really bold approach in that while we recognise that we may have to reallocate some of this fixed term funding into COVID recovery measures such as health and safety and supply cover, we recognised that it was a good sum of money and we wanted to make best use of that. We knew that it was 1 year funding only, so we built in a sustainability plan so that once those teaching staff were gone, we were focusing very much on training and working to support particular programmes and train trainers so that we could then work with existing staff. So as the Executive Director said, we've only recently just heard that this funding may well become permanent, and we are now looking very closely at how we secure the staff that we have in a fixed term contract on a more permanent basis. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. That's reassuring. My second question is about pupil equity funding. I note from the first page of the paper that it says the Scottish Government have relaxed the conditions on those grants, as they have done in the case of early learning and childcare and the Regional Improvement Collaborative, which we'll obviously be talking about later. I'm just wondering that I couldn't see any further reference to pupil equity funding in the report, just for some reassurance that, like in those other cases, while we have been given that flexibility, we have still been making use of that funding to make sure that those who need it get the support.
I can answer that, Convener.
Thank you, Sharon.
Yeah, Councillor Purvis, this has really been a year of opportunity, if you like, in relation to funding, and in Perth and Kinross, in terms of the Scottish Attainment Challenge money, we've only ever been in receipt of PEF funding, which goes directly to schools. And in other local authorities who have had Scottish Attainment Challenge funding, they've had a central resource in order to take forward strategic drivers for improvement. And in Perth and Kinross, we've not had that. So this year, we've been very clear in our guidance to schools that while we have the COVID Recovery Fund, we are driving forward those strategic improvement priorities and interventions that we feel will make the biggest difference. And these are open to particularly schools that do not have a lot of PEF funding, and there are a number of those schools within Perth and Kinross. So the 15% uplift in PEF funding, we've issued new guidance to schools which talks about PEF funding being used very specifically for individual gaps within schools, and that's not got to cut across the strategic information and supports that we're providing. So we're making best use of the money by, if a school has a lot of PEF funding, then they can buy into the interventions that we're providing, and that releases more funding for those schools that don't have PEF. So we're being very much more robust and much more stringent in our consideration of PEF plans. And again, over the summer, we took the opportunity to look at all of the schools' PEF plans, and we're pulling together a report which will come to Lifelong Learning Committee as part of the Raising Attainment report in November.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And just finally, Convener, if you'll indulge me, my last question is on some of the money that was agreed at the budget earlier this year, which is referenced in the paper in relation to the virtual campus and the expansion of course choice, which is something I see progressing. I'm just wondering if we could perhaps get an update on the progress that's been made in terms of rolling that out. Thank you.
Convener, I can start and Sharon and David will be able to come in there. I think, Councillor Purvis, it would be fair to say that there's an awful lot of information to share in relation to the very good progress that's been made here, and it may be something that we can provide in more detail beyond today's committee. But I think it would be fair to say that there's two significant developments. That one about the virtual campus that's developed across Perth and Kinross. Additionally, one of the beneficial byproducts, if you like, of the pandemic was the approach that we took across the Tayside area in terms of the development of additional virtual offers of different subject areas, particularly in the area of advanced hires in languages and computing. And so I guess it's not actually twin track, it's triple track, because of course there was the eSchool development as well, which was, if you like, a virtual school of online supports for children and young people, particularly in the senior phase. But in terms of the specifics around the development of the virtual campus using the Perth and Kinross budget motion monies, then Sharon and David would be able to give just some high level information just now. But I know that that is something of particular interest for members, and we would be happy to provide a more detailed update about that, perhaps at an elected member briefing, if that was considered to be appropriate. Thank you. But I'll pass to Sharon and David, who will have some high level, or David, I think, probably has some high level information to share about that from a Perth and Kinross specific perspective. Thank you.
Yep, thanks very much, Sheena, and absolutely, Sheena's touched there upon the virtual campus, both at Tayside level and at Perth and Kinross level, and we have young people in our school system at the moment who are studying subjects virtually, as Sheena said, at this stage mainly at advanced higher level, but we are looking to roll out the virtual campus, and plans are in place already to produce level 4, level 3 and level 5 learning opportunities for young people as we move ahead. In terms of the budget motion money, every school now has appointed a virtual learning regent, and that is a member of staff who has the equivalent of 1 day on their timetable to coordinate the virtual learning opportunities that are available for young people now, because again, as Sheena alluded to, that's not only within our own virtual learning environment. There's actually national virtual learning opportunities and virtual learning opportunities offered by our partners at UHI Perth College. So the virtual learning regent, really, their job is to tie those offers together, promote them, ensure that young people have access, whether that's something as straightforward as hardware access or the support they need to study in a different way from what they're traditionally used to, but also to scope out and skill up young people and school staff to enhance that virtual offer moving ahead. So it is indeed an exciting time in terms of virtual learning in Perth and Kinross. And again, as Sheena had said, there is a lot more detail behind this that I'd be happy to provide at a future date.
Thank you for that, David. I think a briefing would be really helpful because it's an area that, like you say, we've all got an interest in. Sheena, you wanted to make a comment?
Yeah, I think perhaps it's worthwhile just saying, Councillor Purvis, that much of the initial work that's been undertaken nationally, regionally, and indeed in Perth and Kinross has focused on the senior phase and that breadth of choice of subject for children and young people as the digital offer has developed. Again, you know, we've learnt lots of really valuable things from the pandemic, and it has also accelerated a number of areas of work that have perhaps been, you know, in the gestation for quite some time, and things have really accelerated. And one of those areas with regard to digital is the recognition that for youngsters at National 3 and 4, in fact, you know, Nationals levels, SCQF levels 1, 2, 3 and 4, that there was and is a dearth of online and digital support for those particular areas as well. And that is something that we have picked up in conjunction with our colleagues in Dundee and in Angus, and they're developing, if you like, a comprehensive digital offer around those areas as well. So that takes you through, you know, from broad general education through into senior phase as well. So we're happy to provide a lot of update about that. And in fact, this afternoon, myself, Sharon, David and others will be at a digital strategy meeting where we are looking at how can we begin to plan now to ensure that we have the best approach in place for that wider digital device offer of a device for every child and young person over the life of this Parliament. So that work has already begun with our colleagues across Tayside as well. So as I say, there is lots moving in this area, and we'd be really pleased to provide a full update at a future point. Thank you.
That answer your questions, Councillor Purvis?
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you, and I would appreciate that briefing to hear in more detail.
Thank you. Councillor Purvis.
Thank you very much, Convener. I just want to refer to page 24 of the report in relation to the Scottish Government funding to support mental health and emotional well-being for children and families. And I would just like a little bit of a sort of update on specifically how that money has been used, a few examples of how that money has been used. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Purvis. And again, this is an area where there's been a wheen of work undertaken across, not just within ECS, but with our partners in a range of different organisations as well. So I'd ask Fiona Mackay just to give you maybe a couple of specifics around how some of that money has been used. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena.
Thank you. Good morning. There has been a wide range, as Sheena said, of approaches in both that we have provided some funding for the third sector to support their services that have been really welcomed and valued by families over the last period. But within the council itself, we've also worked through services for children, young people and families, and in supporting some of our youth work provision to increase or develop projects that help young people to increase their awareness of what the services are out there and how to get support. That's very much responding to the feedback that we've had from young people about them wanting to be able to find resources for themselves, be able to access at times and points when they need the information, and have better understanding of what the availability is within local and online services. The third thing that I probably would want to draw your attention to is the development of community learning assistance within our primary schools. We've taken an approach to support their introduction within schools to extend the community link work approach, and to provide them with the appropriate support and service direction, if you like, to do that. The COVID mental health monies has supported the development of a project called Relink, which is aimed at supporting families who are struggling with engagement, maybe from anxiety around COVID or from other reasons that some of the COVID experiences of home learning have led to them perhaps not having as good attendance as they previously had. So the Relink project that's been developed has created some resources, created training, and provided the focus and structure for our community learning assistants that we've introduced to be able to make the best use of that funding so that they can develop it. It also gives us a sustainable resource. So although this funding is time limited, it does mean that what we have created for Perth and Kinross is an ongoing way of working.
No, that's absolutely really helpful. Thank you for that feedback, Fiona. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'm not seeing any further questions in the chat. Thank you to the officers for answering those questions. We covered quite a lot of ground there. So I will, if I can get my screen to unfreeze, move the report. So we've now seen 2 academic years, one partially disrupted as a result of COVID-19, and in some ways it'd be very easy to focus on all the negatives around the disruption to learning, and we all know how difficult it's been for our pupils, families and staff and teachers across education and children's services. And thinking about staff well-being, we know how tired everyone was at the end of the last term before the summer holidays. However, it's true to say that there have also been some positives, and we've seen creativity, rapid decision making, and a move to embrace new technologies that might have taken us a bit longer to achieve. We saw staff from social workers and those who work with some of our really vulnerable families telling us that families have responded well to having one point of contact and more flexibility in accessing services, through to schools embracing virtual learning to help expand the educational offer to benefit all pupils. And we really do thank all those staff who continue to work to identify any gaps in learning and are putting in place measures to support those who need it. We're grateful that governments listen to those who sit on the advisory groups and ensure that financial resources were made available to meet the challenges being faced across the services which work with children and their families. And as an administration, we've also ensured that we made a commitment in our budget to support educational recovery and rolling out of digital learning strategies, along with an expansion of courses and foundation apprenticeships, the sums of monies that are detailed within the report. I'd like to take this opportunity to really thank our officers, but especially those in our teams who monitor finance, Jim Coburn and your team, not just for their careful monitoring of budgets, but also for ensuring maximum use of every penny made available through national and local funding for service recovery. We also heard today about the IT teams who've worked around the clock to make sure that we could deliver those dongles, laptops, tablets, phones, whatever it was that was getting put out to staff and young people. The financial aspect is only one aspect though. We know that without the commitment and dedication of all those who work across ECS, we would not have been able to achieve anything. And our service recovery plan is detailed, but it would only succeed with the laser focus of all our officers and staff. At 3.6 on page 21 of the report, there is a highlighting of outdoor learning, which has come into its own since March last year. And I thank officers for facilitating the briefing session, but also all the elected members, and there were many who don't sit on this committee who made the effort to attend that session. I think it's really important that we embrace all the opportunities to support and develop our children and young people in their learning and support our staff in new and creative ways of working. COVID-19 has been a time of great concern, sadness and worry for us all. And as we seek to rebuild our services, we need to grasp onto the new ways of working and better ways of working that we've discovered through necessity and use them to augment the excellent practice that's already in place. Can I ask Councillor Duff if you'll second the report?
Thank you, Convener. I'd also like to thank the Executive Director and her team for this very comprehensive report on service recovery and the plans for this current academic year. We're all aware of how significantly children's education and related services were hit by the pandemic and continue still to be impacted. I welcome the details of both the Scottish Government and Perth and Kinross Council funding allocated to education and children's services specifically for educational recovery. I'm pleased to note the various ways in which we have supported our children's education and the health and well-being of our staff members and pupils during the last 18 months. And I would echo the Executive Director's comments that ECS staff have worked incredibly hard over the piece to ensure the fullest and best possible educational recovery for our children. The various strategies have been wide and varied, from speech and language therapy to improvements in literacy and numeracy, from supporting mental health and emotional well-being in pupils and staff to enhancing the virtual campus and course choice. The report sets out clearly how our officers in education and children's services have maximised the resources at their disposal to support educational recovery since this pandemic started, and how they intend to continue to provide additional support for all those needing it, especially the most vulnerable young people and families within Perth and Kinross. Convener, I'd like to thank our education and children's services officers, head teachers and staff for everything they're doing to support our young people and to deliver on our strategies for educational recovery. I'm happy to second the report.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Can I ask if there's any comments on the report? I see one in from Councillor Forbes, so I'll let you, and then Councillor Rebeck. Thank you, Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Convener. I was going to just say two quick things. You kind of stole my thunder on one of them, and it was about the IT people, the kind of largely unseen and unheard of people working away behind the scenes that kind of took over all of our lives, although I'm sure they didn't want to do that just a year and a half ago. So I think we need to thank them, particularly in education, for getting all the systems and all that kind of stuff set up, ready for the schools to get back to some kind of education. So I think we should thank them for the work that they did. And I think this is in almost every single contact I've had with parents. They talk about the teachers who adapted really quickly to working from home and doing online learning and all that kind of thing. So I just want to put on record my thoughts, particularly for teachers in the Carshagary, for the work that they've done, because I know almost every single one of them went above and beyond. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Councillor Forbes. We won't talk about the sense of humour that seems to pervade through the IT teams, which takes a little bit of getting used to. Must be something about that department. Councillor Rebeck, please. This is when my connection dies because I've just mentioned the sense of humour. Councillor Rebeck.
Absolutely. Thank you, Convener. I mean, I think there's no doubt we all recognise that there'll be challenges ahead for school staff and pupils, for Scottish Government and indeed for Perth and Kinross Council. And Councillor Simpson gave a very good example of that around appropriate ventilation in schools going forward. Councillor Massey and yourself, Convener, summed it up very well in Councillor Massey's question and your comments, and I don't think I need to add too much to that, but the report asks us to note the extent of funding received and the measures taken to deploy these resources. And I think it is important to recognise both the considerable resource that have been made available by Scottish Government and the excellent work that council officers have done in deploying these resources. And I would like just to commend both aspects of this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rebeck. Councillor James.
Thanks very much, Convener. And just to echo what other people have said previously, but really, in answer to Councillor Rebeck, whilst I agree Scottish Government have provided money, it wouldn't have been if it had not been for a union where money's come from the UK Government initially. So I think it's worth mentioning that that's where the money has come from originally. So thank you, Convener.
Yeah, Scottish taxpayers don't pay tax, clearly, but anyway, we'll move over that.
Thank you, Councillor James and Councillor Rebeck. Not seeing any further comments in the chat function, so if that's us done on that paper, can we agree the report, please?
Agreed.
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 Thank you very much. That takes us on to paper 6, which is the SQA results 2021. And I'm going to invite Sheena Devlin to give the presentation, which I believe was everyone would have received a couple of days ago. Thank you.
Thank you very
Sheena.
much, convener. Thank you, convener. What we're going to do here is provide you with a presentation. You should have, as Councillor Shires said, received a copy of that presentation, and I will introduce that, and David McCluskey is going to talk to that, and Sharon Johnson and I may well also contribute as we go, and there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end, if that's okay, convener. So if we could run through the presentation in its entirety and save questions to the end, that would be we'd be very grateful for that. Members of this committee will be aware that the past 2 years, to understate the case, have been very different from that which we have known for decades for young people and staff in relation to how learning is accredited, leading to the awarding of formal qualifications. The approach in 2021 differed considerably from that which was taken nationally in 2020. So it's not like we've even had 2 years of the same. Each year has been different. Timescales for adopting radically different approaches and guidance to the status quo in terms of exams have meant all of us being fleet of foot to ensure that our young people were not in any way disadvantaged. I would want to accord, if I may, convener, my sincere thanks to all staff and young people and parents and carers who have demonstrated great flexibility and resilience in times of such significant change and challenge. Given the robust approach taken by our secondary team, officers, head teachers and staff in schools, we are confident that our quality assurance processes have resulted in credible outcomes for our young people. Sharon Johnson and David McCluskey will now take us through a presentation which outlines our results for 2021 and the processes by which these were achieved. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena. I'll start off and pass over to David, but as Sheena said, learners have been through two very different assessment processes to achieve SQA awards this year and last year. And so this presentation will provide some details of the alternative certification model, which was developed and implemented for this year in order to ensure that SQA process in Perth and Kinross was robust, transparent and consistently applied. It will also provide an overview of the results of PKC senior phase pupils that were achieved this year, along with some very early analysis of their performance. Could we move on to the next slide, please, Audrey? So different from last year, this year's alternative certification model, fondly known as the ACM, was dependent solely on teachers' professional judgment of demonstrated attainment, and that was based on the evidence of coursework and assessments undertaken in schools and centres. A great deal of work went into ensuring that there was a strong level of support for school leaders and practitioners, along with really clear local authority guidance on assessment and moderation processes. This was done in collaboration with our Tayside colleagues in the TRIC, and that really strengthened our moderation process across all 3 local authorities. Education Scotland conducted an inspection of all 32 local authority systems and processes, and Perth and Kinross received very positive and strong feedback on the process that we had put in place, with no further recommendations for improvements. Can we move to the next slide, please, Audrey? So the secondary team, led by David McCluskey, developed the support plan and the quality assurance system, which was put in place to support pupils and our staff, and then implemented a stringent process to ensure that provisional results were very fully scrutinised before submission to the SQA. So David will now give an overview of how that was achieved and also go through some of the results that we received for PKC. So I'll pass on to you, David.
Thank you very much, Sharon. So our model at PKC was based on ongoing, robust and extremely structured professional dialogue at all levels of the system, between teachers and schools, across schools in PKC, across other schools locally, and with school leaders and national bodies to ensure that all understood and were fully and correctly implementing the alternative curriculum model. Before submission, a final quality assurance check was led by central officers around any data anomalies within schools or within subjects and levels between schools. These checks triggered a deeper dive into the assessment and moderation processes carried out in a school for a specific subject and level, scrutinising supporting documentation, attainment patterns for groups and cohorts, and ensuring that the process, as validated by Education Scotland, had been diligently and scrupulously followed, fully based upon demonstrated attainment and teacher professional judgment. And I think it's really important to stress that this was the final part of a fairly forensic process, with ongoing professional dialogue happening between education officers and school leaders. Can you pass on to the next slide, please, Audrey? An important feature of this model was full transparency. Learners and their parents were to be fully informed of their progress throughout the process. This was clarified through school communication and through communication to parents directly from ECS. It was important that parents and young people understood that the grade reported to them by the school in June was to be the final SQA award that they would receive in August. Central officers engaged directly with pupils at all of our schools to ensure that this was the case. Where parents and young people had queries around these grades, they were encouraged to raise these immediately with schools rather than wait until August certification. Schools did all they could to ensure that there were no surprises in terms of the attainment of young people, which of course was based upon their demonstrated levels of achievement through assessment. An appeal process was created by SQA in consultation with stakeholders. This process, of course, is not yet closed, but indications at this stage are that there are far fewer appeals than we would have expected under the traditional model, although the process is slightly different this year in line with the different alternative certification model. Audrey, can you move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So we are still at early stages of analysing our PKC SQA performance in session 2021. This analysis at this stage is focused on pass rates, quality of passes, and breadth and depth indicators, also known as KPIs. In September, a more detailed analysis will be provided by Scottish Government Insight team based upon national priorities, which will in turn allow our team a deeper analysis of the data to really crystallise any areas for potential improvement. Early in 2022, we'll be able to look even more closely at what this attainment picture looks like for our school leavers in 2021. However, what we can see is that in 2021, the poverty-related attainment gap expressed in terms of pass rates has narrowed, and that pass rates at all levels have improved upon the traditional exam-based model. However, these pass rates are broadly, and indeed in many cases exactly, in line with national averages. Next slide, please, Audrey. Thank you. When we look at these key performance indicators or breadth and depth indicators, we can see that same improvement expressed. Certainly, when we look at the S5 data in terms of level 6 or higher qualifications, however, that improvement is less clearly seen in our S4 experience. With S4, we can see that the pass rate has improved on what we had seen in 2019 and in line with the national average, but not by the same level as that has for S5 pupils. That has led to the same figure in 2019 in terms of KPIs and slightly less than the 2020 model, which as Sharon mentioned earlier was an entirely different model of SQA assessment and certification. This will indeed be a focus of further analysis by our team in the time ahead, so that some of the tentative conclusions we've drawn around that we'll be able to add a little bit more depth and detail to, and again identify any improvement actions ahead. Can we move to the next slide, please? I'm going to pass back to Sharon, who's going to summarise and conclude for us today.
Thank you, David. So just to conclude, there are some key points to note from the information that we have to date. First of all, on the process, our schools and our central teams worked really hard to ensure that our results were submitted with integrity and confidence. Feedback we've received from our pupils found that the assessment process this year in general allowed them to reflect their learning better, and that communication from schools and from central officers was seen as positive, notwithstanding the anxiety of stakeholders during this whole process. Our system was endorsed by Education Scotland scrutiny colleagues, being recognised as fair, transparent and robust. An early analysis shows that PKC reflects the trend across the country in terms of improvement. As David said, we will be doing further analysis of these results, and that will take place at school level, and improvement actions will be considered and discussed at term visits by David and the Quality Improvement Officer team and senior leaders in schools. So David and I are happy to take any questions on this presentation and on the early results that we were able to show with you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon and David. That was really helpful. I'm seeing there's questions starting to come into the chat box. I'll let those come in. I suppose it's kind of, you're taking in all those statistics, etc. But I think it's just always important to remember that behind those statistics are an awful lot of young people that, you know, had a really disrupted couple of years. And I can say this from experience that, having been a parent of a Nat5 pupil, that, you know, actually it was really difficult for them, and it's absolute credit to them, the kind of results that we've seen. And another important factor is I haven't received a single complaint from a parent or a pupil about the process, about, you know, the outcomes of the process, etc., which is also a very positive reflection on the communication that was carried out from school leadership teams, that they made sure that every step, and I remember one of the head teachers saying the key thing was no surprises, you know, that young people would know that when they got that envelope in August, they would pretty much be guaranteed that they would know what would be in it. And that was really important, I think, to give them that certainty as far as they could around what would be in that brown envelope when it dropped through the letterbox. So we've got some questions in the chat from Councillor Liz Barrett, followed by Councillor Purvis.
Thank you, Convener. First, I'd like to thank all teachers, parents, pupils and the whole ECS team for their commitment and perseverance through the challenges of the last 2 years, as Caroline said, and especially the challenges around the assessment periods. And I do congratulate everybody on the improvement in the pass rates. In slide 5, it indicated that the attainment gap has narrowed, but please can I ask by how much has the gap narrowed, and how confident can we be that this is a real improvement, given that we know that we're not comparing like with like in the same assessment models, as Sharon just highlighted? Thank you.
It's a really good question, Liz. Thank you.
I'm happy to answer that question, if that's okay. So yes, of course, as a very good question and a very nuanced question. So what I can say is that the attainment gap has narrowed when we look at it in terms of SIMD between 2019 and 2021. But the amount that it has narrowed is dependent upon whether that's at National 5 higher or indeed Advanced higher. So indeed the gap has narrowed more for Advanced higher than it has for National 5. I think the other thing to be really clear on is we're only really talking about pass rates here. So pass rates are a really crude measure because, you know, very crudely, a school could gain 100% pass rate by being really selective about who was presented at a level for an exam. So it's a very tentative conclusion that we draw about these at the moment. And I think that's where we are at the moment. We're drawing a lot of tentative conclusions around about the experience of young people in this assessment diet last year, and that's based upon a triangulation of evidence from data, talking to young people and what we've seen in schools as well. So that one of the things that we begin to perhaps put together is that indeed for many young people the assessment diet last year, as it was expressed following a successful period of remote learning, was a positive experience. in that for some young people, the experience of going into an exam hall for that one-off exam for 2.5 hours with the tyranny of the clock ticking and the pen, that one-off assessment can be quite daunting, and that perhaps affects some young people disproportionately to others. But that, again, these are very, very tentative conclusions, and I think what we really need to do is wait until we see the data expressed in terms of tariff points before we can begin to kind of expound further upon these early musings. Thanks very much.
Thank you, David.
Thank you for that. Oh, I see Councillor Purvis's question's been asked already. So if there's no further questions, we'll bring that paper to a close. That will come back to us in due course, won't it? So we'll look forward to be able to interrogate the numbers and whatever a little bit later on. I'm going to propose that we take paper 7 and then we have a brief comfort break, if that's agreed by everybody.
Can I have a comment on paper 6, please, convener?
Oh, yep, of course.
Thank you, and I'll be brief. And I know sometimes I say that and I'm not, but I will try and be. I think we need to, as other members here have done, recognise the hard work of teachers in this, and I would just like to echo that. I think it's been particularly hard, and I speak as a parent, as I know the convener is also, for senior phase pupils. It has been really difficult for them, and I think it's important to recognise that and commend them for the robust way that they've got through that. I think that's really important to say. I think there is a bit of learning to be done, and I think there will always be a place in education for exams. I'm sure of that, but actually we've also learnt that we can trust teachers' assessments, and I would quite like to see that more and more as we start to assess attainment with our pupils. I think that's a valuable lesson that we should all take from that. Personally, it's good to see the attainment gap narrowing. We all recognise, be in no doubt, we all recognise that we're well short of where we need to be, and that's just the start of the journey. But nonetheless, it is nice to see the attainment gap narrowing. The most important thing I think that we need to take from this, whether we're as educationalists or politicians, but for me the most important thing to take from this, Sharon Johnson spoke about integrity of the results. These results are full of integrity, they're credible and they're accurate, and I think it's important that everybody recognises that. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Councillor Rebeck. Councillor Baird, you had a comment as well, and we'll just say there's nothing prouder than a granny when she's had her grandchildren's exam results come through, I'll tell you.
Yes, thank you, convener. I was absolutely delighted when my granddaughter got really good results. It was a joy as a grandmother and for the whole family, and I think we can't forget the families who have stood by their children through really hard years and have dealt with their ups and downs. But I think now we can really know that teachers know their pupils best, and I think this continuous assessment has been a new way of working, but I think it's been great positive points for it, and it's encouraging to see the attainment gap declining. So absolutely good, and I would like to commend everybody who's been involved in this. Thank you.
It's a really important message, actually, isn't it, to the teachers across our schools, that that they should have confidence, and they're that they do a cracking job for the most part, and that they should be confident in the results that they're helping young people achieve. Councillor Purvis, I wasn't planning on having lots of comments on this paper, but I'm glad that you're doing it because I think it is important.
Thank you, convener. It was just in relation to some of the comments that have been made, and while there is still an open question about what form of assessment is best, and clearly different forms of assessment are going to suit different people, I do think in relation to the poverty-related attainment gap, which was obviously the question that Councillor Barrett asked, that given there's been a reduction nationally with a change of assessment, I think that probably a large part of that, and we will need to see further detail, is going to be down to that change of assessment. And I think that there still needs to be a real focus on trying to address this issue, because we shouldn't be in a situation, and it's something that's been the case for a very long time, where people's backgrounds significantly affect their results. And while yes, you can change the system and artificially change the results there, we do need to tackle the root causes, and I know that we're all committed to doing that. But while yes, it's good to see that, I am slightly concerned that that might be an artificial improvement, and we need to not lose sight of that important task.
Thank you for that. I think it's been very interesting following the national debates that, you know, in the newspapers, on television, etc. And hopefully there'll be an opportunity for people like us that sit on lifelong learning committees to participate in that debate as it moves forward. Right, I'll draw this paper to its conclusion, if that's okay, and we'll move on to paper 7, which is the Perth and Kinross Education Improvement Plan. And I've just noticed that I'm handing over to the Vice Convener for this paper, so I'll hand it over to you, John, and we will take a comfort break after this paper. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Convener. Yes, item 7 on your agenda, Education Improvement Plan, and I'll ask Mrs. Devlin to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Convener. The purpose of this report is to seek approval from committee for the annual Education Service Plan 21-22. This plan sets out how the Education Service will address the aims set out by the Scottish Government in the National Improvement Framework over the next year. The guidance provided by the Scottish Government for this planning session indicates that local authorities should focus on recovery, renewal and improvement, taking into account the wider insights provided by national publications and the new requirements in relation to the UNCRC and of course the Promise. This plan outlines the high-level areas for improvement and sets out the ambition of the service to improve attainment and reduce inequity by prioritising improvement in inclusive practice, strengthened partnerships and professional learning and development. There are a range of officers here from Education Services who would be happy to answer any questions that committee members might have. Thank you, Vice Convener.
Thank you, Sheena. As always, if you have a question on this paper, can you please indicate in the chat function? Thank you. Councillor Liz Barrett, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Convener. And this is really a follow-on from my question in the previous section. We do welcome the key focus on improving the poverty-related attainment gap, which is on page 61 of our papers, and also the recommendation in the OECD report to the Scottish Government, which is on page 89, that the Scottish Government must recognise that more needs to be done to be rigorous about the gaps to be closed and to pursue relentlessly closing these gaps and raising the bar. My questions are, do we have any indication of when we can expect these recommendations to be implemented by the Scottish Government? And please, could we have some more information about the point in page 61 about how PKC is aiming to tackle this very stubborn gap? Thank you.
Councillor Barrett, I can pick up on the first part of your question, and I know that Sharon and her team will be happy to pick up on the second aspect. In relation to the publication of the OECD report earlier this year, Scottish Government have in fact accepted all of the recommendations from that report, and currently there is a considerable amount of work being undertaken to outline how those recommendations will then manifest themselves in a range of guidance that will come from government to local authorities and indeed on to schools. Not least, I understand that there will be the publication of the education recovery strategy by the Scottish Government imminently, and we would expect to see some of the response to the recommendations from the OECD report in that. And in terms of the specific response within Perth and Kinross, I will ask Sharon and her team to pick up on that with you, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena. Councillor Barrett, in relation to your question about the poverty-related attainment gap and how Perth and Kinross intend to close it, there is a long and involved story about what the poverty-related attainment gap is, which I definitely won't go into at the moment. But you'll be well aware that in Perth and Kinross we've had some discussions at national level as well about what constitutes poverty, and the fact that the SIMD measures don't actually reflect very well the poverty gap in Perth and Kinross, and therefore we use ACORN data as well as the national measure of SIMD to consider where we need to improve. Poverty has increased over the pandemic, and we've got recent figures that tell us that because of the local economy and the impact that the pandemic has had on that. And our poverty is spread over a large geographical rural area. So there are many factors that we have to take into account when we're considering how we're going to tackle that. We've settled on 3 important priorities across the whole of our planning in relation to both excellence and equity. One is the very clear focus on inclusive practice, because in addition to our poverty-related attainment gaps, we're recognising the large increase in children and young people with recorded additional support needs within Perth and Kinross. And what we're aware of is that historically, over time, we have put additional capacity into providing specialist supports for those young people. But we really need to focus now on inclusive practice within our classrooms. And recent research tells us that the biggest difference is always going to be made by the teacher in the classroom. So we've got a big focus in this plan on inclusive practice at classroom level, but right the way through to the supports that schools can receive from other services and partnerships, and indeed our own central services, and how we best use the specialist supports that we have. So that's a key strand for this plan that is really very much targeted against that. The other thing is that we're strengthening our partnerships with children, young people, parents, and the people who support our schools. So our children and young people and families services and our third sector organisations. And we've got specific plans in place to fully integrate that support and really strengthen our GIRFEC approach. And the third thing that we think is going to make a big difference is investing in professional learning and development for our practitioners, for our support assistants, for our specialist teachers, and our school leaders, to make sure that everybody is well equipped with an understanding of what the gaps are within their context and what they can do about it. And I suppose the fourth strand is what we've just discussed, which is our COVID education recovery plan. And that was the focus of that very first paper that we brought to you. And the additional funding that we've received, we really are making best use of that to target interventions where we can make the most difference. So I'll stop there, and if there are any further questions, I'm happy to expand.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up, I assume there'll be KPIs associated with those 3 or 4 priorities, so we'll be able to actually measure how effective they are.
Yes, absolutely, Councillor Barrett. And so you've got the plan, but behind the plan, which is a high-level plan, which will go to the Scottish Government, there are team plans with measures and outcomes related to each of those actions.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sam.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Councillor Sarwar.
Many thanks, Vice Convener. My question is on 2.6 in the report, where it talks about key achievements and performance, and it lists counselling in schools, delivering in all secondary schools and for eligible primary age children. And I'd be interested in what makes a primary school child eligible for the counselling services, and also if you could talk about how many pupils per school. Is it a limited number, and how would a head teacher then be able to choose? Thank you.
If that's okay, I'll start the answer to that, Councillor Sarwar, and perhaps Fiona Mackay may add detail that I'm not able to provide. In relation to primary school pupils being eligible for counselling in schools, the Scottish Government's guidance is about pupils aged 10 and over, and so therefore some primary school pupils at the older stages are actually eligible for counselling in schools. And in relation to your second point about is there a limited number, there isn't a limited number. However, we were aware that counselling is not for everyone, and it can be helpful in certain circumstances and not in others. And so Susie Turner, our principal educational psychologist, prior to the funding being rolled out fully in Perth and Kinross, made an arrangement with the Dundee University to put in place some training for our principal teachers of guidance in secondary schools to help them to think about where counselling might make the best effect. And all of the principal teachers within Perth and Kinross undertook that training programme, and that has allowed them to really think carefully about where counselling could support young people and where it might be a different approach that would be taking place. So I hope that answers your question, but perhaps Fiona Mackay could answer any further detail.
Happy to add anything if there's anything further, but I think Sharon's given a good coverage of that. We do have quarterly monitoring of all of the contracts that we have with the organisations that provide the counselling in schools, and obviously we'll continue to look at that to see whether there is any waiting lists that are building up. That is not the case at the moment, and I certainly wouldn't want it to be. And I think that our approach to try to build a wide range of resources is the key to ensuring that we get the right people into counselling and the other right support for those that require different.
So sorry, just to clarify, you're saying that there wasn't a waiting list. So if a principal teacher from one school felt they needed 10 or 15 young people having counselling, that would be fine. There isn't, how would that look at the moment?
That's, I suppose, not the experience that we have, in that there are large numbers of young people from different schools that are requiring it. I think that that's the work that Sharon has discussed there around our educational psychology team supporting staff in terms of being selective around what requirements there were. If there did happen to be 15 young people from one school, we would obviously then look at that. If the organisation itself wasn't able to address the need that was there, then we would be quick to look at what the alternative requirements would need to be. But we haven't had that experience to date.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think Executive Director would like to comment. Sheena?
Thank you very much, Vice Convener. I think, Councillor Sarwar, if we were seeing something like 15 requests coming forward all at one time, we would probably, Fiona and her team would probably be discussing that specifically with the teacher, who we would have expected to have had discussions with other staff in the school about that, and look at, whether that was indeed appropriate, or whether there was a very specific issue that needed addressed at a particular point in time. And picking up on Sharon's point, there's a range of interventions across a spectrum, depending on the need behind that, and there's never a one size fits all. And so that which may be appropriate for some young children and young people would not be appropriate for others, and we have access to a wide range of other supports as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Jackie, did you also want to comment?
Thank
Jackie,
you.
and you've got Thank you, Karen.
Just to build on what the Executive Director has just said, we need to bear in mind that we also have funding and a strategy through the Children and Young People's Community Health and Wellbeing Support Framework, and that strategy was considered by the Children, Young People and Families Partnership, because although the money comes through the local authority, it's to support a wide range of seamless self-refer services across the area. So, for example, we are funding RASAC to specifically deal with some of the referrals and self-referrals that they have from young people who feel that they have been the victim of sexual crime. and to offer therapeutic support there. So the counselling in schools should be considered alongside and dovetailing with a wider range of community supports that are being developed with the support of that funding as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any requests for any further questions unless anybody wants to quickly pop a queue in the chat function. This could be a few seconds. No. Okay, thank you. I will then move the paper. The report before us provides an update and progress against the Educational Improvement Plan for 2020-21 and our priorities for academic year 21-22. The improvement plan reflects our vision for our children and young people and sets out our ambition to improve attainment and achievement and reduce inequalities. Like so many things which have been affected by the pandemic, it is difficult to compare the 2021 school year with previous results. The education system had to adapt rapidly to changing circumstances, meaning some performance measures are not available or were not comparable with the previous datasets. Page 15 of the improvement plan provides some detail of the key COVID impacts, such as the impact of home learning, that nearly 5,000 pupils and 430 staff were required to self-isolate during the year, and the number of children being educated at home significantly increasing from 63 to 110. The key achievement and performance measures against the 2021 improvement plan can be found at paragraph 2.6. The priorities for this year's improvement plan remain the raising of attainment and achievement and closing the equity gap as set out in the Raising Attainment Strategy for 2020 to 23. Key among these are improving inclusion, supporting mental health and well-being, raising attainment in literacy and numeracy, enhancing digital learning and infrastructure, improving transitions and positive destination outcomes. The plan also recognises the importance of a highly skilled, knowledgeable and confident workforce as critical to improving attainment and achievement for our children and young people. I'm therefore pleased to note the continued development and delivery of a professional learning programme which will improve leadership, professionalism and skills among our teaching and support staff. Convener, I'm delighted to move this paper and ask members to support the recommendations to approve the Education Improvement Plan for 21-22 and to request the Executive Director to submit the plan to the Scottish Government by 30th September. Convener, will you please second the report?
Thank you, Councillor Duff. I'm very happy to second this report, which is very much a kind of look back and look forward and setting out our priorities for improvement. We know that we do this based on detailed analysis of attainment, performance, achievement, data on equity gaps, information gathered from schools, parents and pupils, and evidence of impact against actions in the previous year. I'd like to thank all of those in Paul Davidson's team and elsewhere in the Council who do gather all of this data, which helps to inform our decisions moving forward. The data on page 61 shows our performance across indicators is good, but that there remain areas where we still face challenges and indicators which are stubborn and which we will continue to work towards improvement. The paper covers such a huge range of areas and outcomes, and behind that we know sit many members of staff who work so hard throughout the year. I'm delighted to second this report.
Thank you, Convener. Are there any comments? Councillor Rebeck.
Thank you, Deputy Convener. Just a brief comment about closing the attainment gap, because Councillor Barrett quite appropriately mentions it and suggests it's long-standing and stubborn, which it is. I don't think there's any doubt anybody in government realises that. I don't think anybody thinks there's a quick fix or an easy answer to it either. But it is what all the work around understanding adverse childhood experience is about. It is what extra funding for teachers is all about. It is what pupil equity funds all about. It is what free school meals for all primary children are about. And above all, it is what expansion of early learning and childcare, which we're away to discuss, is all about. So I think there's a lot of hard work to be done, but I think everybody involved is willing to get on with that hard work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rebeck. Is there any other comments in this report? Okay, I'm not seeing any further requests for comments. If that's the case, can we agree the report?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. As previously indicated, we will now have a short recess of 5 minutes. So it's 11:05 now. So can we please all come back for 11:10? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Duff.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully everybody's back at their screens now, and we shall move on. And we're now looking at item 8 on our agenda, which is the expansion of early learning and childcare. And I will invite the Executive Director, Sheena Devlin, to introduce this report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener. This report provides a summary of work that has been carried out since the last committee report of the 26th of August 2020 in respect of the delivery of phasing of 1140 hours of early learning and childcare. It also provides an update on progress made towards full implementation from February 2021. It's important to note that Perth and Kinross has been able to deliver the requirements of 1140 hours on time and ahead of the legal requirement of August 2021, despite the challenges of COVID-19. This was due to the very good progress made towards the expansion of ELC prior to the first lockdown. I'm pleased to say that our colleagues from our early learning and childcare team, led by Ben Scott, are here today, along with Sharon Johnson and myself, who will be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena. Are there any questions on this report, please? Councillor Rebeck.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. A quick question about childminders, please, if I may, because I think childminders might be at least partly crucial in supporting additional support needs children at a young age, and I'm wondering, are we going to pay them more? I was trying to think of a polite way of putting that, but that's really what I'm asking. Thank you.
Councillor Rebeck, I can answer that question for you. We have an initiative which is called Community Childminding, which had just started prior to COVID pandemic, and we had started a pilot. And the thinking behind that community childminding model is that to support that very thing that you've described, where there are families with more complex needs, and therefore that impacts on the child, or indeed there are children with complex additional support needs of a medical nature or such like, then that's when the community childminding model would be perfectly appropriate and actually really necessary. And so within that pilot, we had started to offer these childminders more training, and so therefore it would be a much more bespoke offer. They would not necessarily be able to have the same ratios of children that they would have because of the increased needs of particular children, and therefore it would be incumbent on us to offer them a higher rate of pay. However, we will be starting all of that again, and that is all to be teased out. But yes, that would be important to do so.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McDade.
Thanks very much, Vice Convener. I've got a couple of questions, if I may. Just following up on Councillor Rebeck's question slightly around childminders. The report talks about an increase of 17 since 2016. But obviously we approved this, I think, originally in about 2018, and there was a lot of concern around childminder numbers then. So I'm wondering if we can get a bit of a picture around how the numbers of childminders, partner providers as well, and their staffing, which all go hand in hand together, have reflected since 2018. And particularly, I'm sort of looking at the recruitment bit at 2.21, where it talks about our recruitment for local authority settings, and I'm just concerned. I hope that hasn't been at the detriment of our partner providers by cannibalising their staff to ensure that we're staffed, but then creating problems for them and causing them to, have problems. So I'm just wondering if we can, get a bit of a picture around about that, if possible.
Councillor McDade, thank you. There's quite a lot in that, so I do my best to answer the parts of the question. So in terms of childminding, prior to the blueprint for 2020, childminders weren't seen, well, it wasn't possible to have them working in partnership with us, and then therefore that's why there's been such an increase in the last few years, because that was part of the expansion plan. As the report states, we now have 19 in partnership with us, and within our next round of tendering process, we have another 3 who are hoping to come into partnership with us, and that will continue in terms of our marketing and helping our childminders who are not currently in partnership with us but are registered with us to understand the benefits of coming into partnership with us, and that will be ongoing as we progress. In terms of our partner providers and staffing, throughout the expansion of early learning and childcare, our relationships have improved, and we have a focus group with our partners, and these kind of issues are discussed on an ongoing basis. I meet with them once a month, and there was a time when they were feeling that maybe we would be taking their staff, but actually it hasn't quite materialised that way, and they have their own offers on staff for retention, etc. So that hasn't really turned out to be the case, primarily because we were really clear that we wanted to grow our own, and we had initiatives such as Learn to Work in Early Years, we have our modern apprentices, and we have the career progression, which starts with play assistants, and these people have to start their study and then can progress on to being ECPs. So that's the current situation, but through ongoing really positive relationships with our partners and indeed our childminders, we would hope to be able to tease out any further issues into the future.
Okay, thanks. That's really positive, and I remember the plans around growing the numbers and using a lot of redeploying staff from other parts of the council who might want to retrain into a different area, change sectors, etc. And I know that's really positive. I want to come on to, if I may, talk a bit about rurality. So 2.24 of the report talks about to address equity and ensure that ELC workforce is organised to best target children who face barriers to achievement and learning. Early years teachers will be allocated to nursery classes based on the number of children and the percentage of pupil equity funding the school receives. And now, from previous PEF reports, I recall that a lot of rural schools don't receive any PEF money at all, but that doesn't mean that they don't necessarily have significant other disadvantages that are measured in various ways, including by the government. So I'm thinking particularly around a number of schools in my ward which are classed as some of the 5 topmost rurally disadvantaged areas in the country in terms of rural deprivation, but they're not going to potentially, unless they get, for example, one child who receives PEF, that will not get considered around that. So for me, in terms of equity, I think that some of our rural settings might be at a disadvantage here because of the way that we're setting this up, and I'm wondering if we could get some more information around the decisions and the processes around how it was decided how we were going to allocate this money and what that will look like for some of our rural settings.
Councillor McDade, the section of the report I think is in connection to the redeployment of permanent teachers to nurseries, and what I would want to do is reassure you that all of our settings, no matter where they are in Perth and Kinross, have access to a teacher, and if the nursery setting itself didn't have a permanent teacher either for full-time or half of the time, which is the new model, there's a central allocation from the early year support teachers, so all of our schools have access to that learning and teaching appropriate for the setting and indeed the playroom. So I would want to reassure you on that front, but certainly we can provide more information if indeed you wish that. In terms of the process that I had undertaken to make these new plans, I worked alongside a group of head teachers of some whom were from rural settings, and so all of these things were taken into consideration. And on top of that, we have our family support workers who will be out in our settings very soon, and all of our settings across Perth and Kinross have an allocation of that, so that there are teaching supports but also family supports across Perth and Kinross to try to ensure that we are meeting the needs of our children and our families.
Okay, thank you, Bernadette. I believe Sharon Johnson wishes to come in with a comment at this point. Sharon.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Councillor McDade, just in answer to your question about the rural strategy, so Ben has answered the question specifically in relation to early years teachers, and that's about the particular function of an early years teacher in relation to equity. But as I mentioned earlier on, our overall strategy for closing gaps and addressing learning needs in Perth and Kinross has to take account the rural element. So a lot of the work that we do in relation to staffing rural areas, in particular Highland, where there are staffing issues, we are always looking to overstaff where we can. And so therefore it would be fair to say that where we've got an element of need within a rural capacity that doesn't fit within a formula, we always put that in as an additional, I suppose, cushion. And so we've done the same within early learning and childcare, so that we don't have the deficits in staffing that we still do have, and that is an ongoing area of consideration for us. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate the answers there, and I think that particularly your last point there around the overstaffing and some of these things too. Because, and by overstaffing, you know, people watching this might think, oh, we're putting lots of extra staff in. That overstaffing might be sort of up from, you know, 0.4 to 1 to a whole person type situation, as it were. But I think that's really positive, because we have got sustainability issues in some of these schools. A final quick question is, are we looking at, sorry.
Councillor McDade, there are other questions. I'll come back to you if you have a further question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Purvis, please.
Thank you. Just one question you'll be pleased to hear, Vice Convener. I wanted to ask about the rates paid to partner providers. I know that Councillor Rebeck alluded to the childminder situation. I know from my ward and speaking to a number of private nurseries that there was concern, I think I've raised this before, about Perth and Kinross being at the lower end of the scale in terms of the rate that we pay to partner providers. Now, one of the great benefits of early learning and childcare rollout is that there's choice, you know, effectively a voucher system, and people can choose to go to private and third sector providers as well as the state provision. So it mentions about increasing the rate, but there wasn't much detail there. So I'm just wondering, what's that rate going to be increased to, and does that bring us more in line with the Scottish average? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Purvis. The report was written at a time prior to the decision being made, and so I'm able to share that information with you now, and our partner provider nurseries have had that communicated to them. So we have increased our rate to £5.31, which is more in line with the vast majority of other local authorities across Scotland. So yes, we've increased that, and that is from the 1st of August.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Vice Convener. I suspect the answer to my question is somewhere within this report, but I can't find it. Earlier on this morning, in the sort of update paper that we looked at, there was talk about the Scottish Government allowing us to be a bit more flexible with grants. That was one of them, was early learning and childcare. So I just wondered if that's given us any problems further down the line in terms of funding, if that money's already been used or partly used or been reallocated to something else.
Can I come in there, Convener, Vice Convener, if that's okay, and kick off, and Ben will be able to provide any more detail. But I guess this is where we can give a short answer, which is no. it hasn't provided us with any difficulties further down the line, Councillor Forbes. And in fact, the latitude to be able to use recurring funding, which is what the ELC funding is, flexibly has been beneficial for us in the council. Ben, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
Sheena,
short answers are good. I'm happy with the short answer.
Answer. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions, so I'll come back to Councillor McDade for his question.
Thank you, Vice Convener. And Councillor Purvis asked one of my 10 questions, so I'll ask one of my other ones as my final question. It's a very engaging paper, so thank you very much, Bernadette and Sharon. It's a very interesting topic as well, obviously. My final question, which I ask at the end of all of the ELC papers that have come before us, is are we going to potentially look at any more additional settings? And I come back to my favourite proposal of Kenmore, given the rurality and the long distance that people on Loch Tay have to travel to get to a ELC setting. And just coming back to the earlier points around rural poverty, the connectivity of these rural communities, and actually quite high employment of low-wage workers in that area in particular, for example. So I'm just wondering if there are any further expansion plans under consideration.
Councillor McDade, thank you. We as an early years team keep an eye on registrations and numbers on an ongoing basis, and you'll appreciate that we have 11 ELC communities, and therefore we are always looking at our numbers and our provision versus our need, and so I suppose the short answer is that that would continue to be under consideration if it was required.
Thank you. Hopefully that answers your question, Councillor McDade. I am not seeing any further requests for questions, so I will move the paper. Convener, this is an excellent report highlighting the exceptional work of our Education and Children's Services team in delivering the expansion of early learning and childcare across Perth and Kinross from 600 hours up to 1140 hours. I'm pleased to note that the full 1140 hours entitlement for all eligible children has been provided in a range of options well ahead of the legal duty deadline of 1st of August 2021, offering high quality learning and childcare and flexible hours to suit families' needs. It is quite apparent from the breadth and depth and complexity of the work detailed in the report that officers have worked long and hard with childminders, partners and with our own provision to put in place a system which supports almost 3,000 children and their families. All of the infrastructure projects, with the exception of Rattray Primary School Nursery, have been completed despite delays brought about due to COVID. The Rattray Nursery work will be completed by May of next year. Despite the delay, it did not impact on the provision of ELC places in the area. It's also pleasing to note the quality of provision we have achieved in Perth and Kinross, with 98 settings having an evaluation of at least grade 4 good, and 11 of these having at least one evaluation of grade 6 excellent. I note that 2 settings have an evaluation of less than good, and that action plans and resources are in place to support their improvement. A further 7 settings await their evaluation following their new registrations. Experiencing a positive home learning environment in early years is the single most important predictor of good quality outcomes for our children, and the creation of 20 full-time equivalent family learning practitioners will provide direct support for families and the best start for our children's learning. Training and development for ELC staff is widely promoted, and the training opportunities provided by the Council is highly rated by attendees. A wide range of learning and development training is available and has allowed providers to develop their settings and implement best practice. Convener, I commend the work of everyone involved in the expansion of the early learning and childcare programme, and I'm delighted to move the paper. Will you please second?
Thank you, Councillor Duff. I agree that this is an excellent and, as Councillor McDade said, engaging and readable report, which highlights the challenges faced by our officers in delivering the requirement of 1140 hours of early learning and childcare by August 2021, and in fact their achievement that they made in outlining the journey to get to this point. Despite the challenges of a global pandemic, which makes it even more remarkable. The paper outlines the organisation into ELC communities, and it seems a long time ago since the meeting one Friday afternoon in the chambers to agree on the officer proposals, through to the development of provision through childminders, partner providers and local authority settings. Staff have been recruited and gone through extensive training programmes. There have been building projects and improvements to the school estate across Perth and Kinross in order to create some really truly amazing learning spaces, and that work is still ongoing with just Rattree to be completed. I would draw members' attention to page 111 of the report and the infographic on page 143, which summarises responses from families which pretty much tell the story in themselves. Thank you very much, Councillor Duff. Delighted to second the report.
Thank you, Convener. Are there any comments, please? Councillor Rebeck.
Thanks again, Vice Convener. I can't think of a subtle way of bigging up Lethem Nursery at this point, so I'm just putting it out there now, and that's it. That's it done, because it's a fantastic facility. I think, as members here have heard me speak about this before, I do think expansion of early learning and childcare will be genuinely transformational for Scottish society. It will help parents in work poverty, but in terms of children, I believe it will help in closing the attainment gap. I believe it will help in dealing with adverse childhood experience and potentially additional support needs and identifying them early. It will encourage healthy eating. It will encourage parental involvement. It will encourage creative play. But like any great government policy, it needs to be implemented by caring professional individuals, and I believe that that has been done superbly by Perth and Kinross Council. I think Sharon and Ben and many others and their teams deserve the utmost praise for the work that they've done in difficult circumstances. It won't be perfect, and it will need to be re-evaluated constantly, I believe, like any challenging piece of work does and will, but it cannot be commended highly enough, and I'm happy to do that here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rebeck. I'm not seeing any further requests for comment. Let's give anybody a quick few seconds to get a request in. No, okay, thank you. In that case, members, can we agree the recommendations of the report to note progress and to request the Executive Director to provide future updates through the BMIP reporting procedures?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, I'll now hand back to the convener for paper 9. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Paper 9 is a bit of a landmark paper. It's the final update on the implementation of REACH, and I'll invite Sheena Devlin to introduce the report.
Thank you very much, Convener. And you mentioned in the context of the last report that remembering back to a meeting in Two High Street where we started talking about ELC expansion, and likewise I am minded of a full council meeting some 5 years ago when we got the go-ahead for something that has since become known as REACH and that is truly transformational. This report is the culmination of 5 years of careful planning, research and determination to implement a transformative model of providing tailored support for young people who are on the edge of care and who are at risk of becoming accommodated. The success of REACH not only demonstrates positive outcomes for young people and their families, but it has also been an efficient and cost-effective response which has prevented 53 young people requiring external fostering or residential care. There are many benefits of adopting this approach, with access to a range of professionals, which has been extremely successful. This has in turn helped divert referrals to other key statutory partners by ensuring the provision of preventative and restorative approaches when required. A significant financial investment was made by Council over a 5-year period from 2017, and the project has met expectations to be financially sustainable. This is a very positive report with good outcomes demonstrated for the young people involved and indeed for their families. These outcomes clearly take us a significant step forward to deliver on the aspirations of our corporate parenting plan and on our commitment to deliver on the promise. The committed staff team offer a model of engagement which has not been possible before Reach existed, and young people across the whole of Perth and Kinross now have a range of options for support which were previously impossible to provide. Hazel Robertson and other colleagues are here today from Services for Children, Young People and Families who'd be able to answer any questions that members may have in relation to this paper. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Sheena. Can I ask if any members who have questions could put Q in the chat? Not seeing any. Councillor Massey.
Do apologise, didn't expect to be first there.
I know, there you go. You were quick in the quick off with the queue.
Right, thank you, Convener. The work done by the Reach programme and the outcomes for our young people is to be highly commended. My question is really, what are the next steps for the Reach, and are there any plans for introducing the learnings across other services?
Thank you, Councillor Massey, and I'm really delighted to be here talking to this final report on Reach and the success in meeting our original objectives. In relation to next steps, I think what we can say is Reach has provided a wealth of evidence on what works. And I think what we now need to do is profile the need for children who are under 12. You'll recall that Reach has focused very heavily on children between the ages of 12 and 18, and that has certainly demonstrated what can be achieved in that kind of focus. So what we really now need to do is profile that need for those children under 12, and I can say that of the last 4 children who have required an external residential resource, 3 of those have been under 12, and that has significant implications for the future, not just for outcomes for those children and their families, but also in terms of the costs, both emotionally and financially, over many years. It is uncharted territory at the moment. This will require further work to explore the funding to secure a very robust approach, and if we can use the lessons that we've learned in the development of Reach, that would be our intention.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McDade, followed by Councillor James.
Thanks, Convener, and indeed, just reflecting on the Executive Director's remarks, it's actually nearly almost 4 years to the day that we first approved this at a special council in August 2017. And I have to say, there were a number of us obviously who were anxious at the potential for what could potentially go wrong, because it is a very, very difficult area, and there were a lot of things that could have gone wrong, but the amount of planning and the reassurance that we were given at the time, the amount of planning that had gone into it to make sure that things didn't go wrong is commendable. And I just want to ask a question, not about all the great outcomes, because to be honest, we have heard an awful lot about the fantastic outcomes, and I think that we can all agree that this has been a really good move, a really good shift for the families involved and for the council. And actually, I want to reflect on where this came from in the first place, or where part of it anyway came from in the first place, which was to provide a sustainable service, because the previous service was not sustainable either in staffing terms or financial terms. And the paper talks at point 4 around the financial costs of the current programme, but what I would actually quite like to probe is how much has been saved over the existence of the programme, roughly, approximately. I think on my head, we're talking, it was about, I think, an £800,000 a year saving, roughly, something like that, and how much we're projecting this will save us going forward, compared with sticking with the model that we previously had been using. So a slightly different take on it, perhaps, but I think the results on the actual care side speak for themselves, and I think it's just important to reflect actually that there was a real success in the transformation on a financial point of view for the council and for our residents as a result of that as well. So wonder if someone can perhaps give me a bit of context around that.
Thank you, Councillor Daisy. Jackie and Hazel. Yep.
Yeah, I'm happy to start, and I think we have some of our finance colleagues who could give you some more detail. But in terms of the savings, if you wish to look at it like that, I mean, certainly we've referred to it as what costs have been avoided, and what we know for sure are that there were 14 places, residential places, that we have managed to avoid and reduce, from where we started 4 or 5 years ago. So that in itself has been a positive. You'll see from the report that 53 children we have assessed as not requiring residential care because of the nature of the support that's been provided to them. So clearly, just looking on those estimates, what we've done is taken an average placement cost over a 3-year period for the placements we absolutely know for sure have been saved, so for those 13 places, and the estimate would be that there's approximately 4.2 million that has been avoided in terms of spend by having children supported in a very different way within their communities and in their families and schools, which is where they ought to be. Certainly the sustainability of reach into the future is pretty much guaranteed from where we sit at the moment. That is very closely monitored by our project board, who continue to meet quarterly just to oversee the financial commitments within reach, and that is something that will continue into next year in the first instance to ensure that that's continued. But maybe Jackie wants to add something.
Thank you for that, Hazel, and thanks for the question, Councillor McDade, because it's enabled me to look back. I came to Perth and Kinross in 2014 as Head of Services for Children and Young People and Families, and at that point we were overspending every year between £750,000 and £1 million on the residential schools budget or residential placement budget. And we're now no longer in that position. So it's the avoidance of those costs. So we're not actually saving money, we're just avoiding that overspend, if you like. And Hazel's quite right that since 2018-19, when this was established, we have avoided costs of between £4 and £5 million. It's roughly about £4.5 million. Our finance colleagues advises us. So if we think about this as a spend to save, which we were saying it was back in 2017, it has actually proven itself. And your questions earlier about how would we expand knowledge about how that's worked and how that bold approach and the very comprehensive review that led into that. I know Hazel's going to lead a workshop in a few months' time around that internally within the council. But I think it does have application more broadly, not just within ECS, but into health and social care more generally. And I know that we've had considerable interest from external local authorities asking how we went about this. So and I think it is at this point in time quite unique in Scotland what we've managed to achieve there. And we had a visit about 4 to 6 weeks ago from the Promise team who were expressing some interest in this as well, in terms of how can the lessons be used more broadly across the implementation of the recommendations of the Independent Care Review. So I think, as Sheena said in her introduction, this really gives us a really good starting point. I think we've done a lot of the groundwork there. but in terms of that cost avoidance, you know, significant savings for the council over the piece. Yeah.
I see, Sheena, you want to come in?
Thank you, convener, and thank you to Hazel and Jackie. And Councillor McDade, if I can just pick up on your question and indeed your observations and your recollections from that full council meeting, because it was a big ask that was being made of elected members, and we were fully aware of that. And I would have to say we have been very grateful to elected members for their support and their faith in us taking this really significant change forward, because it was a radically different approach that was being suggested, and it did need that full backing, which we did get and we're grateful for. And I think it's important that is mentioned here. And you've heard about the cost avoidance in terms of financial terms, which is really important. But also what is really important are the social costs that have been avoided and that we hope will continue to be avoided for the young people who are able to benefit from the range of supports through Reach. And in a way, those are incalculable, because we don't know what they might have been, but we hope we've certainly managed to avoid what they might have been for many of the young people most of the time. And so a number of those social costs that have been avoided may not manifest themselves in the time that we engage with those young people, but we hope we'll be with them for the rest of their lives. Thank you.
Thanks very much to Sheena, Hazel and Jackie for their answers, because I think that has exemplified, and I'm sure the convener would agree, the transformation not just of the service and for the outcomes for young people, which is obviously the primary purpose, but also for the council. And I do think there's a lot of, as someone who sits in the IJB, I think there's a lot of opportunity for learning across on the health and social care side, which is obviously going forward going to be a big pressure. So I think that's a really great opportunity that you are sharing this work. So thank you.
Absolutely, thank you for that. Councillor James.
Thanks, thanks very much, convener. Obviously today I'm substituting for somebody, so I'm not au fait, if you like, with the workings of this brilliant committee. And the report, Sheena, is great, and it tells me exactly what you do. But as a layperson, I'm assuming that REACH is an acronym. What does REACH stand for, please?
Well, it is an acronym, but it's not really stand for anything. It was certainly, we wanted young people to be resilient, and I can't even tell you off the top of my head what all. We don't use it in terms of as an acronym, but REACH was very much about reaching out to people reaching in, you know, so that we would work with our partners from across, not just statutory partners, but third sector partners, and reaching out in every way to support these young people and their families within the communities and within their schools. So REACH had much more of a meaning within you know, that sort of context. It wasn't really intended to be an acronym.
Thanks for that. It came up in capitals, and I was desperately looking for, you know, to see what it stood for and what it was we were actually trying to achieve. I mean, the report lays that out, but I just thought it was a snappy word. But you know, with any corporation or organisation, if you're involved, it makes perfect sense, but to everybody else it doesn't. So that's sorry.
That's fine.
Councillor Duff and Jackie Pepper get the extra brownie points today for putting it in the chat what the REACH actually stands for. Well done, you two. So I'm not seeing any further questions in the chat. There's now a whole lot of other stuff appearing, so but I'm not seeing any further questions. So I'll move the report. I'm absolutely delighted to propose this paper to committee today. Back in 2017, when we took the decision to implement a different approach and be bold and brave in delivery of services for young people and their families who were considered on the edge of care, we knew that this was something we needed to get right. And it's a testament to the dedication of the staff across various services and disciplines who work together to achieve the aims of REACH, and you all know now what REACH stands for, and ensure that young people have been able to stay within their local communities and receive the support they needed. REACH is very much a one-stop response to meeting the needs of young people. And the statistics in 1.7 of the report, where we are benchmarked as one of the top local authorities in delivering support for the young people who are looked after within their communities. That is as a direct result of the staff who have redesigned services, broken down any barriers and delivered a 24/7 service providing support. The transformation of service has also resulted in reductions in the residential care budget, and I noticed that Jim Coburn and Alison O'Brien are still in the meeting, and thanks to them and their teams for all their work on that aspect. Ultimately, today marks a landmark for the REACH project as it moves to being embedded within the service of ECS, and this marking the final year of implementation. I'm very confident that this service will go from strength to strength, and I thank every member of staff who's got us here and has ensured it has been a success and delivered the results for young people, their families and wider communities. I'd like to second that, Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Convener. As you indicate, this is a great news story and one which is a shining exemplar of what can be achieved in support of young people who are looked after or at risk of requiring residential accommodation and therefore on the edge of care. REACH's multidisciplinary response and the dedication and commitment shown by the REACH team has significantly improved the outcome of a great many children of 12 to 18 years of age, keeping them out of residential care, allowing them to return to or remain in their own homes, or supporting them into independent living. The personal stories of the young people helped by REACH are testament to the benefits achieved by this initiative, allowing them to remain safe at home rather than becoming looked after, restoring and strengthening relationships with their families and communities, improving the emotional well-being, mental health and personal esteem, and giving them the confidence to express themselves clearly and engage in education and employment. The combination of preventative and restorative approaches has seen a significant reduction in children needing to go into care, and as we have heard, has contributed to the avoidance of both emotional costs to the children and families and significant financial costs to the Council in the last 3 years. Convener, since this initiative came to the Council in August 2017, REACH has been one of our most successful transformation projects. Its success has been widely recognised by the young people and their families that we have helped, and I'm sure by all members of Perth and Kinross Council. Other local authorities I know are keen to follow suit. Convener, I'm delighted to second this excellent report.
Thank you very much. That moves us on to comments, and I see we've got Councillor Rebeck followed by Councillor Sarwar.
Thanks again, Convener. My apologies for being a bit premature typing my C in there as well. I normally type it because I'm not particularly coherent with the technology and then press the button when you ask, but I pressed it prematurely this time, so my apologies. And not entirely related, but just a little big up at this point for the organisers of the C200 Cup last Friday and the good work they do around raising funds for care experienced young adults. It's appreciated. And just to concur with Sanders' comment about reservations a way back then, which I shared to some degree, but I'm delighted to say, and it doesn't come as any surprise, that Hazel and Jackie and our teams were right all along, of course. So again, sincere congrats and thanks for the work that's being done. Previous commentators that suggest it's been transformational for many young people at their most vulnerable time of life, I think are absolutely accurate and really important. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Sarwar followed by Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Convener. I just wanted to draw attention to the virtual briefing that's mentioned in 2.2 and just to reflect my thanks and gratitude for what an excellent briefing that we had in March. I certainly didn't have any questions today because I was able to ask them all, and I did have quite a lot of questions. If anybody was there, they'll remember. But it was a very impressive and impactful presentation. It really gave us an insight into what Councillor Rebeck's just said, that transformational approach for young people, and has really particularly changed the life of the young lady who gave the video presentation. It was really well done, and I just wanted to pass on my congratulations to such a dedicated team who are able to step in at these pinch points in life for these young people and really provide that holistic support. And I look forward to hearing more from the service in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. You're absolutely right on that, and I think all along the openness and transparency of the service and the people involved in it, including visits to the space they have in Perth, etc., has been really helpful because it's allowed us to sort of follow the journey that everyone's been on. So I would echo your comments there. Councillor Barrett, followed by Councillor McDade.
Thank you. I just want to pass on also thanks and congratulations to Jackie and Hazel and everyone who's been involved in the REACH programme. We recognise this isn't just a successful finance exercise in terms of the money saved from other services, but most important to me, and as many other elected members have said, and led by Sheena, is the huge impact this has had on the lives and chances not just of the 53 young people who've already benefited, but also their families and carers, and the impact on our communities of them having better choices. We do very much look forward to supporting similar for the under 12s and in health and social care when this can be developed. Thank you and congratulations to you all.
Echo those comments too. Councillor McDade.
Thanks, Convener, and I just wanted to sort of follow up a bit on what I was saying earlier around and what the previous commentary has been around what a transformative project this has been. And this was, I think, one of the final transformation projects of the Council's transformation plan, one of the more difficult ones, possibly the most difficult one. And I think that the elected member engagement has been very good all the way through, and I'm pleased that the committee and the council agreed that we would have regular updates, because I think they have been informative and important, that we've seen that progress over the last 4 years. And I think that for me, there's an awful lot of learning out of here, not just about how we can transform services, but actually the elected member engagement, as you commented on, Convener, around offering us opportunities to visit, etc., has been very good all the way through, and that sort of, as it were, hand-holding, for a better word, has been important, because it was a very scary thing to do. It was a very different thing to do. There was Yorkshire, I can't remember which of the Yorkshires that we were modelling this on, were really the only major local authority that had undertaken a similar thing. It was a step into the unknown to a degree, and we did have, as Councillor Sarwar says, it was North Yorkshire, thank you very much, we did have a lot of questions, both at the council meeting, which anyone who watched it would have seen, but actually there were briefings in advance which went on for, I think hours. I remember, I think, probably asking at least 10 questions of the executive director at the time in one of the earlier briefings, because of the level of complexity and importance that we placed on this. But one thing I would like to comment on, and I think this hopefully, Convener, that you might be able to take this back to the leader of the council, is that I think it's time the council had another transformation plan to look at what services we can transform going forward, and using REACH as a very good example of learning that we can apply across other services. And I think that the idea at the end of the last transformation plan was we were going to embed transformation throughout the services, and I don't think I have seen as much of that as I think I would have liked. And I think maybe you do just require to sit down and plan out a plan and then carry that plan through, because what we've seen with REACH is that that has worked and that has been effective. So I think that would be a really positive bit of learning that we could also take back, that this was a really effective council strategy, and that this particular project was very successful as well. And I think as elected members, there's a really good opportunity for us to learn and take from that. But congratulations very much to all of the team, because it is an incredibly difficult project, and I'm imagining a lot of stressful, sleepless nights for a lot of the senior managers involved in overseeing this to make sure it went right, because it is a lot of responsibility. So thank you very much to all of those involved, and if you can pass our thanks on to the teams on the ground who we know do a very difficult job in difficult circumstances.
Thank you, Councillor McDade. I'm sure officers will take all those comments back to the staff on the front line, as it were. So I'm not seeing any other comments in the chat. That's got a bit busy now. So with that, we'll can we agree the report, please?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
That takes us on to paper 10, which is the catchment for the new primary school at Bertha Park and future of Ruthvenfield Primary School options appraisal. And I'll invite Sheena Devlin to introduce the report, please.
Thank you very much, Convener. This report and options appraisal considers the creation of a catchment area for a new primary school designed to accommodate pupils from house building at the north-northwest of Perth. It also considers the future of Ruthvenfield Primary School, which is located in the middle of this house building. Two options were developed. These options take into account where families live now, where families may live in the future, and the capacity of schools in these areas. A pre-consultation exercise was undertaken to establish the views of parents and carers in the affected areas and the wider community living in the Ruthvenfield Primary School catchment area. 45% of parents and carers from Ruthvenfield Primary School responded. However, the overall response rate was at around 9%. Option A, which retains Ruthvenfield Primary School, was the preferred option of those who responded in the pre-consultation phase. Option B, which incorporates the Ruthvenfield Primary School into the catchment of the new primary school, would cost the council less money. The report details that officers are dealing with much more uncertainty in terms of how communities in these areas may develop in the future. The recommendation of the report is that officers undertake a statutory consultation in respect of the establishment of the new school and its associated catchment area, as detailed in option A. The statutory consultation will also consider adjustments to the catchment area for Ruthvenfield Primary School, Pitcairn Primary School, Tulloch and Lunkerty Primary School. We have a range of colleagues from Education and Children's Services and colleagues from Housing and Community Services here today to be able to answer any questions that elected members may have. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Sheena. I'll give councillors a couple of minutes to put cues in the box. I see Councillor James and then Councillor Simpson, please.
Thanks, Convener. I guess you knew I'd be asking a question, Sheena, as this has been a topic close to my heart very recently, and I'm delighted to see this come forward. I have a couple of questions which have been highlighted. I've written them down so I didn't forget them. On page 178 of the report, in paragraph 2, I think it was, sorry. It says there's a transition period where, due to redrawing of boundaries, we could potentially have kids in this school, but siblings who aren't currently in that school would then not become eligible, if that makes sense. You know, so you can have kids in the school while we redraw the boundaries. The rest of their siblings might not be eligible to join that school with them. Can we make provision for that? Only reason I mention it is because that's happened recently.
Convener, I think I would want to ask, I think it's Karen Robertson would be able to pick up on that specific question. Yep, Karen's put something in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena. In response to your question, Councillor James, the level of detail that you're seeking within that question is something that we would be including within the statutory consultation. And what we would be intending to do and is to draw on the vast experience that we had in undertaking a consultation like this previously. We went through a very similar process for the first time in decades of creating a new secondary school, creating its new catchment, what the impact was on the other catchment areas, and how we would manage families who had children in one school but subsequently would become pupils at a new catchment for younger siblings. So within the proposal paper, if the committee is minded to approve the report today, we will have to set that out for parents and the wider community about how we intend or how we see that working in the future and seek their views on it. And I suppose what I would say to you is that when we did that for Bertha Park, there were some very valid comments came back to us from parents that we were able to consider and review what we had thought and make some changes. So we would be intending to do something similar within this process to be able to kind of get the best fit that we can with the schools that will be operational until such time as the new primary school is open. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Karen, and I'm grateful for everything you've done already. Convener, I've got another couple of questions, but I'm happy to wait till other people have asked theirs, if that's okay.
Okay, I'll come back to you. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you very much indeed, Convener. I have a question concerning Table 2 at 5.1 with the capital costs, if I may. I wonder if we might have a little more information on what the £275,000 will be spent on, given that the existing building is a Category C, and I think possibly more alarmingly what the £2 million will be spent on if things continue past 2025. Maybe just a wee bit more detail on what works are necessary.
Certainly, Councillor Simpson, and we're joined by our colleagues from Property Services, and Scott Nicholl will be able to answer the specifics around that for you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Councillor Simpson. So you asked two questions about, one was the 275,000. So really that's money identified over a 3 to 5 year period, aimed at bringing the building up to condition B, and primarily, well, there's three things really. Primarily the roof. So the roof to the Victorian building needs really an overhaul, so a survey and then repairs to fix any leaks. So that's the principal thing that would probably bring the Victorian building up from being a C condition up to a B. There are other things we would want to look at, rainwater goods, and some of the electrical installations. The electrical installations are okay, but there's some aspects like the fire alarm which would probably need to be looked at, as they're probably about 15-20 years old. So that's the primary thing is the roof, I would say. And that's the 275,000. The 2 million I think you asked about as well is a longer term thing, looking at the life expired parts of the building. So there's the infill block would need to be replaced, staff toilets, accessible toilets would need to be replaced, and at that point we would also look at a refurbishment of the remaining parts of the building. So I suppose that's a longer term project, and in doing so probably look at insulation levels, glazing, external doors to try and retain heat.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Simpson?
That's very comprehensive. Thank you very much indeed, Convener.
Thank you, Scott. Councillor Rebeck.
Thanks again, Convener. Just a quick promise not to rise to Councillor James bait the next time. I'll just roll my eyes in private. But he does make a very valid point, actually, about the need for a pragmatic approach to these matters over the next 2 or 3 years, whilst we're consulting with everybody. And it's just I just seek a quick reassurance, because, like I say, it does have a valid point. Just a quick reassurance that there will be ongoing communication and a pragmatic approach to admission policies over the next little while as we seek to get it right. the catchment review for Rutherfield, because it is important that we get it right, and it is quite complicated. So just seeking those reassurances, which I'm sure I'll get. Thanks.
Absolutely.
We're happy to give reassurances that we will continue to just do exactly what you've said, Councillor Rebeck, look for pragmatic and sensible and legal approaches to anything that we do in the meantime.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
And we know that we. I just say we know we have Karen Robertson's encyclopedic knowledge of the law surrounding this area.
Absolutely. And like Councillor James, I'll ask my second question once he said his turn again. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McDade.
Thanks, convener. I just want to pick up on the issues around Rutherfield condition, which were touched on earlier, and Councillor Simpson's question around what do those works involve, and in relation to the life expired buildings and climate upgrades. And we've heard at this committee very recently, or at full council very recently, around the fact that work costs go up. So you know, we're in 2021 now, and we're talking about 5 years' time, the cost of these capital works will increase. And we've also heard that doing work at the same time is cheaper, because if you're going to rip out the fire alarm, and you might as well do the other wiring at the same time, and you might as well do the heating, because you're going to have to get into all the same ducts and everything. So I suppose my question is really, why are we not going to do all of the capital works at the same time, because it will be cheaper in the long run?
Someone that can answer some of that.
Apologies, convener. I thought perhaps maybe Carol or Scott would come in with an answer there. I beg your pardon.
I can endeavour to answer that if you want, convener.
Thank you, Scott.
Carol might want to add something. I guess the key thing, Councillor McDade, would be decanting. You know, if we're doing a roof survey and roof repairs, and even an element of doing the fire alarm, you can hope to do that, you know, either out of hours or at weekends or whatever, and get that done without decanting the school. The issue of doing a major refurb, as you know, is decanting. And then, you know, where do you decant the school population to? Providing temporary units is costly, and you need to have a location for that. So I think that would be the thing that would need to be planned in. And so I don't know if that would possibly be planned in as part of, you know, having built the new primary school, then you might be able to use spare capacity if there's any in the new school. But that's my thoughts on the matter, is, you know, planning a major refurbishment when you are doing lots of electrical work, lots of plumbing, you know, doing work to even to the fabric of the building does usually lead to some form of decanting.
Carol, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think if that answered Councillor McDade's question, I think it was based on the existing building, wasn't it, rather than the new school? Yep.
If I can just follow up on the answer then, please, convener. I assume that 2 million would contain, if we're having to decant, I assume the 2 million value potentially contains those costs of a decant, if that's necessary. If it can't, because presumably we know roughly what numbers of pupils would expect to go into the new building, and if the new building has the capacity, then obviously they can be decanted there. And if it's not likely to have the capacity, then presumably that 2 million figure will contain the decant costs. And if that's the case, then I would think my point would really still stand about it would be cheaper to do it now than later.
We would certainly think that the new school would have capacity in the first few years to be able to use for a decant for Rutherfield Primary School. I think that's absolutely certain. Decant costs are also revenue costs rather than capital costs, so that's why it isn't contained in that figure.
Can I add?
Oh, on you go, Scott.
I was just going to add, just as a general, well, two points. Just a general point is there is a kind of health warning on the capital costs. The 2 million is a kind of rounded estimate at the moment, and it was based on studies that were done a couple of years ago, but quite broad brush. And we had a briefing on Monday about what's happening with capital pressures at the moment, and contained within that was what's happening with inflationary pressures, extraordinary inflationary pressures at the moment, which we honestly don't know how long will last. They may last for 6 months, or they may be a continuum into the future. So any figures that we're talking about have to be given that health warning. And as Carol has said, decant would normally be a revenue pressure. It would be a revenue cost, sorry. So it's not contained within the 2 million capital estimate that we've given.
Okay. Thank you very much. Does that answer your queries, Councillor McDade, in as far as it can at the moment?
I think so. I think my understanding of capitalised costs, when we do capitalised work, we quite often capitalise revenue costs associated with the capital work. So I would have assumed that decant costs would have been capitalised as part of the project, but that's fine. Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Purvis.
Thank you, convener. I wanted to ask about the transport costs with the 2 options, because while it's alluded to in the papers, it doesn't go into much detail. Clearly, whichever option we go for, there will be people living around the new primary school who will no longer have to be transported, but presumably with the option of closing Rutherford, that would require some people to be transported that wouldn't otherwise have to be. I'm just wondering, is that cost, as best as you can estimate it, reflected in the estimates for the annual operating costs, or is that being dealt with separately? Just because it doesn't seem to be explicitly mentioned in the table 3 in the paper.
If I could answer that question, Councillor Purvis, we haven't included transport costs within the figures. As you'll understand, the master plan is constantly changing and core paths will be put in. There are plans in the Almond Valley provision to actually provide additional roads infrastructure, so potentially safe routes at this point may not be the safe routes in the future. So we did make an attempt, but it was too difficult for us.
Okay, thank you for that. I suppose my only point, and the recommendation is I think the right one, but that could further change the comparison between the 2 options, perhaps actually in favour of the option that we're going for in terms of the running cost. But I suppose that's a comment rather than a question.
Okay, so I now have Councillor James with additional questions, followed by Councillor Rebeck with your additional question.
Thanks very much, convener. Thanks for indulging me. On probably aimed at Karen again. On page 183, 7.3, it says the timing will be determined by the buoyancy of the housing market and the pupils generated by this. Obviously, I sit on planning committee, and yesterday we passed plans for 300 and odd houses to start in the Almond Valley development. So the building's already started. Taking that into consideration and Bertha Park, the speed at which that's actually getting developed, realistically, what timescale do you think we'll be looking at for this?
Councillor James, I think Carol Taylor and Peter Marshall would be able to give you some information in relation to that. Thank you.
Councillor James, in terms of your question, is your question about when the school will be built, or I'm not quite sure what timing you're asking about.
Sorry, Carol. Yeah, it just said, obviously the whole of this programme, if you like, including because there's capacity within the local development plan for space for a school in the Almond Valley development. I know perhaps our preferred option is to put it in Bertha Park. My point being, there is a need for a primary school, and it will be dependent on the housing. So yes, I suppose it's the build. At what sort of time do you think we'll be looking at putting this plan into action?
So this is the start of a long-term plan, and I suppose this school that we're building at Bertha Park will do us as long as it needs to do us. Peter and I have already had detailed discussions, and I think that's one of the reasons that we're saying that this is the best proposal that we can make at this time, because the master plan is complex, it's very long term. We only have detailed information for the next 12 years in relation to house building. It changes all the time. We don't know who's going to buy the houses. We don't know where they're coming from. We don't know where they're going to send their children to school. So it is really, really complex. My team do lots of modelling and lots of scenarios. So at the moment, I could say to you that I think we will need another school beyond the school at Bertha Park. But at this point, I don't know when. And Peter might want to add to that.
Thank you. At the moment, the housing market is buoyant, and there are every signs of that continuing for the near future. But as we all know, the housing market has peaks and troughs over any 10-year period. But it is encouraging at the moment. And Bertha Park, for example, last year's estimates for their completion rate was moving forward into next year to consistent 100 houses per year. And Almond Valley building up to 25, from 25 next year to 60 for the following year, so slightly lower delivery rate than Bertha Park. So if that continues, we'll be thinking about having to plan the second school probably in about a 10-year period, but that's purely speculation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Councillor Rebeck.
Thanks again, convener. And before I ask this question, just to make it very clear that the SNP group here very much welcome this report and the recommendation to adopt option A. I think that's very welcome. So thanks for that. I think it's really important that all the impacts of the recommendations in 9.3 are committed to in terms of revenue spend and capital spend. I think for a long-term future for Rutherford Primary School, it's really important that we all commit to that, and I'm happy that the SNP group will. And it leads on to my question. I think Carol's already touched upon it, but I think the reason that the little phrase in 9.1 in conclusion it is proposed at this time to recommend option A, I think Carol's alluded to the fact that this is around the building master plan going forward. But again, I just seek reassurance that there's no hidden meaning to the at this time bit of that recommendation, and that we're all fully committed to the long-term future of Rutherford Primary School here. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Rebeck, you're absolutely correct. Obviously what we've said is this proposal is the best proposal that we can make at this time on the information we have, but the master plan is complex and it's long term, and there are lots of variables, and we have hundreds of scenarios in relation to what might happen in the future. And yes, it's possible there will be catchment changes, so that is the reason for stating that within the report, purely the fact that things may change in the future, but we don't know at this point when and what the changes will be.
No, thanks very much for that. I think of a greater understanding of that even in the last 10 minutes or so, so that's appreciated. Thank you.
It's quite carefully worded, isn't it, to reflect a complex situation that is quite hard to put into a paragraph in a report, even if you're Peter Marshall. Yeah. So I'm not seeing any.
I appreciate that better now. Sorry, convener. Thank you.
I'm not seeing any further questions in the chat function, so I'll move on to proposing the report. Just give me 1 second. My screen has unfortunately frozen again, despite me saying nice things, but Lifelong Learning Committee is today asked to agree that the Executive Director commences a statutory consultation in respect of option A of the paper. This would create a new catchment area for Ruthven Primary, a school I had the pleasure of visiting prior to lockdown last year when I met with staff and pupils and heard from them what it was like to be a learner at Ruthven Field and what positive stories the children had to tell me. We know that the catchment area around the school has become problematic given capacity at the school and new house building in the area, adding pressure. Adding pressure to the role, and that would mean that children living closest to the school, including those in new house building, could attend the school. I also saw the need for the condition within the school to be improved, and option A commits us to doing that. Furthermore, option A commits us to consulting on building a new primary school to be built on a site adjacent to Bertha Park High School and a new catchment to be created for that school, serving the new and growing communities in North West Perth. In moving forward with option A, officers will have time to assess the dynamics of the new communities within the Housing Master Plan before we make further decisions about the school estate. Option A recognises the investment of multi-million-pound investment to be required for the new school and further investment in upgrades of Ruthven Field, with a further commitment and investment in the school estate across Perth and Kinross. I'm very happy to propose this report and look forward to the next steps in the statutory consultation. Ask Councillor Duff if he'll second the paper.
Thank you, Convener. It's always been recognised that the substantial development of housing in and around the Amman Valley, Bertha Park and Perth West would have a significant impact on the provision of schooling and its associated catchment areas. Over the next 11 years, an anticipated 2,450 houses, furnishing in the region of some 650 pupils, will be built, making the education provision in the wider area during that period somewhat complicated, and I'm sure we don't envy the job of the school estate team in trying to make sense of it all. However, it is imperative that the Council ensures that schools have sufficient capacity to accommodate all children living in the relevant catchment areas. I'm delighted that community convincingly supported our option A during the pre-consultation phase and what that means for both Ruthven Field Primary School and the Bertha Park High School and their catchment areas. Both of these recommendations are fully supported by the educational benefits statement set out in Appendix A. Consequently, Convener, I welcome this report and I'm happy to second the recommendations as set out in paragraph 9.4. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. I'm seeing comments from Councillor McDade and then Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Convener, and welcome this report. I think this is a good outcome and I'm very supportive of it. I had a very similar feelings to Councillor Rebeck when I read the report, and the words "at this time" filled me with fear, and I'm very pleased to have had that reassurance that we are all 100% committed to Ruthven Field's future, and perhaps Councillor Rebeck and I are just a bit jittery and need to get a bit less jittery perhaps, but I think from my point of view, this report reflects the views of the school community and the wider community, and it is a good result for the new community at Bertha Park also. So I think that from my point of view, the report does reflect both the community's desires, all of the communities involved's desires, and is the best outcome collectively. So I'm very happy to support it, and thank you very much for bringing the recommendations that you have.
Thank you, Councillor McDade. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you very much, Convener. I too welcome this report and also going for option A, although I think the "at this time" part is actually very important because we don't know what the future holds. Parents may decide in the future to vote with their cars and go to the shiny new school, which is only 1 mile up the road. An easy cycle, I would say. So we don't want to make a future committee a hostage to fortune here. But I think also it's very important, and I know that Karen Robertson is all over this, so I have every confidence in her, but that we really do look at the catchment area this time. I sat on placing requests, appeals this summer, and it was almost embarrassing to tell people that the children couldn't go to the school that literally adjoined the bottom of their garden. So, but we're avoiding that on this occasion, but we do need to be agile, as you mentioned before, and we need to be prepared to make a change where necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. And before I forget, many thanks to members who sit on the placing request committee, because I know it's been an epic summer of those meetings. So your efforts are appreciated and noted. Councillor Baird, please.
Thank you very much, Convener. I suppose maybe I'm the councillor who at this time maybe has got more concerns than anybody, and I really make no apology for mentioning my poor community at Unard, who after all these years these children are bused into a school in the city centre, so they have got no option but to be bused into school. So having said that, and also represented Rusbinfield at one time, I am absolutely delighted that this school is going to be refurbished, because it's a fantastic wee school. And I, like Councillor Simpson, sat on placing requests this summer, and again had to say to children you couldn't go to the school or their families. So I'm fully supportive of this, and I hope this can go ahead as quickly as possible. And I fully understand the cost is probably going to increase, but there's a commitment here for a new school. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baird. Councillor Rebeck.
Thanks again, Convener. Just to echo what's already been said, particularly by Councillor McDade, I am reassured, given this committee, about the long-term future, and welcome the report, and I'm delighted that what's not quite a unique school, but nonetheless quite an unusual school, to have a rural feel about it, but which is actually almost quite urban in its setting. I think it's really important that we've all committed to a long-term future for it, and it's to be welcomed. So thank you. Thank you,
Councillor Rebeck. Councillor James.
Thanks, Convener, and thanks to the education team, if you like. Special thanks to Sarah Burke, the head teacher at Ruthenfield, who, by the very nature of being a great school, is very popular and people want to get in there. And I was privy to that only recently for the placements, despite campaigning that this school was going to close. We're now an option, and I would like to see, if we are looking at being forward thinking, that bearing in mind we have the Crosshay Link Road about to be started, and Stormontfield is probably actually closer to Lunkerty and Bertha Park than it would be to Scone. So if we're looking at catchment areas, it would be nice to perhaps look at the options there, and future-proof it, if you like. Delighted to see the orchard in Ruthenfield at last, despite, like Lewis Simpson's just said, live right next door to school but can't go to it. I'm over the moon with this, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor James. I'm sure Karen and Carol will have noted your comments about possible catchment areas. If that brings us to the end of any comments, can I ask that we agree this report?
Agreed.
Agreed.
It's been nice to have so many positive reports today. That takes us on to paper 11, and I'll hand over to Vice Convener to take this paper.
Thank you, Convener. Paper 11 is about the Integrated Children's Services Plan and the TRIC progress updates, and I'd ask Executive Director Sheena Devlin to introduce the report, please.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener, and can I please just offer belated apologies. I'm aware that my network connection has not been terribly strong today, and it may be that my sound has been coming and going, and I have inadvertently been doing a Les Dawson and Roy Barraclough impression during the course of this meeting. Apologies if that has in fact been the case. In relation to this report, there has been a single children's services plan for the 3 local authority areas, NHS Tayside and other statutory partners, including Police Scotland, since 2017. Lifelong Learning Committee received a report on progress of the plan in January 2020, although we do appreciate that I now think about things as BC before COVID, and that sometimes it's quite difficult just to remember everything that happened before March 2020. The Tayside Plan for Children, Young People and Families 2017 to 2020 reached its conclusion just at the point of the start of the onset of the global pandemic. A decision was taken at that time to delay the preparation of a report in progress achieved over its third year, and with Scottish Government approval, the statutory requirement to prepare a new plan from 2020 to 2023 was eased. It was agreed via the appropriate command structures to roll the 2017-20 plan forward for a further year using the existing delivery structures, and that a 2-year plan should then be developed for 21-23. We felt it was inappropriate to be developing a new plan until such time as we began to have a somewhat clearer picture of the impact of the pandemic and that which it was having on our services. Before committee today are 2 progress reports. Appendix 1 provides the progress report for the final year of the 2017-2020 plan, and Appendix 2 provides a progress report on the work taken forward during session 2020-21. The new Tayside Plan for Children, Young People and Families for 21-23 is also provided as an appendix. This report continues with the 5 priorities that were established in 2017 and has refined its focus to a smaller number of strategies and actions for our collaborative. These priorities will align closely with the Business Management Improvement Plan for Education and Children's Services, which will be presented to the Council Scrutiny Committee on the 15th of September 2021 and subsequently to Lifelong Learning Committee in November 2021. In addition to sharing this report with committee today, I would want to inform committee that you will know that I have been the lead officer for the Tayside Regional Improvement Collaborative since its inception, and that I have stood down from that position with effect from the end of July of this year, for no reason other than I think it's appropriate that another colleague is able to have the same opportunity that I've had over the last 3 years. And interestingly, my decision to step down as lead has coincided with the decision made by other leads in other regional improvement collaboratives across Scotland. There's a range of colleagues here who will be able to answer some of your questions, but I should point out, Convener and Vice Convener, that today we don't have representation from Police Scotland, health colleagues or third sector colleagues. So if there are specific questions relating to any of those services, it may be that officers from ECS are not able to answer those particular questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction, and I'd ask members to bear that final comment there in mind when asking questions this afternoon. Are there any questions on this report? I am not seeing any requests. I'll give it another few seconds. Nope. Okay, in that case, I will just move straight on to moving the report. As stated, the last of the papers before us today covers 2 update reports from 2019-20 and 2020-21, and also the new Tayside Plan for Children and Young People and Families for 21-23. The report provides details around progress and performance in relation to our 5 key priorities: pre-birth and early years, learning and attainment, health and well-being, care experienced children and young people, and finally safeguarding and child protection. Members will note that the performance framework and the update reports evidence good improvements in a high percentage of the indicators, even against the backdrop of COVID, with the key highlights for Perth and Ross documented at paragraph 2.8 in the covering report. Going forward, the next plan is a 2-year one, bringing us back into line with the statutory reporting timelines. The very laudable vision for the plan is that our children and young people will have the best start in life, and Tayside will be the best place in Scotland to grow up. I'm sure that is a vision which we all aspire to. Convener, I'm happy to move the recommendations contained in the report. Will you please second the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Delighted to second, and would just like to put on record our thanks to Sheena for the work that she did laying the foundations for the Tayside Regional Improvement Collaborative, and I'm sure your colleague will take it on to the next stage. So just with those comments, I'm happy to formally second.
Thank you, Convener. Are there any comments on this report? Councillor Rebeck.
Just very briefly to underline Councillor Shire's thanks to Sheena for getting this very valuable work underway. It's appreciated, and thank you for another excellent report, which is to be commended. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rebeck. I'm not seeing any further requests to comment, and with that then I'm sure we can all agree this report, and I'll hand back to the convener. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That takes us on to item 12, which is appointments to the Perth and Kinross Educational Trust Committee. Can we agree the appointments of Councillor Ian Massey and Councillor Lewis Simpson to that committee?
Agreed.
Convener, I think there is also a request to include Councillor Liz Barrett on that.
Ah, okay. And can we agree to Councillor Liz Barrett joining that committee as well?
Agreed.
Thank you. And then we have a valedictory for Mrs. Pat Giles, who you will all know well, and has retired from her being the Church of Scotland representative on the Lifelong Committee, which she has served on since August 2011. And I've got a few words to say about Pat, largely because she's not here, so she can't give me that look that she gives. Having sat on this committee myself since 2007, I feel that Pat has been very much part of the Lifelong Learning Committee family, and I have very fond memories of Mrs. Giles, Bob Band, Barbara Vaughan, Willie Wilson and Councillor at that time Alexander Stewart, often in the company of John Fife or Peter McAvoy, catching up on current affairs together in the chamber or after committee. A former teacher, Mrs. Giles has brought a great passion for lifelong learning and especially for improvement and raising standards across all areas of the service. We're very grateful to you, Pat, for your commitment to attending meetings and for always engaging by ensuring you were very up to speed with the rapidly changing scene across Scottish education. I particularly enjoyed the opportunity to meet with Mrs. Giles and Sheena to hear their expert opinions. We send you our very best wishes, Mrs. Giles, and our grateful thanks for your serving as the Church of Scotland representative on our committee. And I understand that a gift has been arranged by committee services on our behalf, which will be sent to Mrs. Giles. So with those words, I will bring the meeting to a close. It's been a bit of an epic session today, 3 hours and 23 minutes. So thank you very much, everyone, for your attention. And I'd just like to thank the officers for the papers today. I know everybody's been well and truly up against it, not just because it's been the summer, but also because everyone's been a bit busy since March last year. And taking that into context, I'd just like to thank them because the papers have been extremely readable, quite lengthy, but I think the fact that they are long by necessity, but the fact that they are engaging and readable, as has been commented on today, is really appreciated by all of us. So if officers can take that on board, that's really helpful. So, and I see through my window that the sun has come out, so enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Can I just echo, sorry, Convener, can I just very briefly just echo your comments about Pat Giles? I've only known Mrs. Giles since 2017, but she's been a valuable addition to the Lifelong Learning Committee, I've no doubt. Pat was never shy in telling you the way she saw it, but in a very courteous and positive way, and it's welcomed, and we need more of it. So just to pass on my best wishes as well to Mrs. Giles. Thanks, Convener, for indulging me.
Thank you for that, John. I didn't see your comment. I'm sorry about that. And I'm quite sure if you see her in the high street, she'll be wanting to keep on telling you her views on Scottish education. So you'll know.
They're usually fairly accurate, to be fair.
Exactly. So you'll know to duck and cover or whatever. So hopefully she'll watch this the YouTube clip and have a bit of a laugh. So yes. So thank you for those comments, and we'll draw the meeting to a close.